Iwo Jima means Sulphur Island in Japanese. It is located 650 miles south of the Japanese home islands and is part of the Empire of Japan. Iwo Jima is approximately 5 miles long and it's less than 2 miles wide at its widest part. On the south end of the island is Mount Suribachi, scene of the historic raising of the American flag and the most famous combat photograph of all time. During World War II, this small island was perhaps the most heavily fortified fortress on Earth, honeycombed with miles of underground tunnels, armed bunkers, and defended by more than 22,000 Japanese troops sworn to die in combat rather than surrender. The invasion on February 19, 1945, was preceded by the largest naval bombardment in world history, and it scarcely made a dent on the Japanese defenses. For the next 36 days, nearly 75,000 United States Marines were locked in an epic struggle to secure the island for use by American B-29 bombers. In terms of ferocity and valor, the battle ranks with Gettysburg and Normandy in American history. In the 1,364 days from the Pearl Harbor attack to the Japanese surrender, with millions of Americans fighting on global battlefronts, 353 men received the Congressional Medal of Honor, the nation's highest decoration for courage above and beyond the call of duty. Of these, 27 were for action on Iwo Jima, 13 posthumous. During these 36 days, 25,851 Americans, most of them in their early teens and early 20s, suffered casualties, of whom 6,800 were killed, died of wounds, or were missing in action. The 21,000 Japanese garrison on this 8.5-mile square island of volcanic sand, of them approximately 1,000 were taken prisoner and more than 20,000 fought to their deaths. Iwo Jima in American hands meant that 24,751 Air Corps crewmen were saved from ditching disabled aircraft in the North Pacific with almost certain loss. By the war's end, 2,251 emergency landings had been made on the island by the B-29 Superfort bombers. My name is Steve Lepardo. I've asked 4 Marine veterans from Iwo Jima to share their battlefield memories with us for posterity. They are Russ Whipple, Jack Tanner, Wayne Hoy, and Phil Lepardo, whom I'm proud to say is my father. This is their story. First of all, I'd like to ask all of you to tell us who you are and where you came from, how long you'd been in the Marines, what outfit you were in. Why don't you go ahead, Mr. Whipple?
I started in the Marine Corps back in 1941, enlisted in Ohio. I was too old at that time to qualify for a commission, although I had a degree from Springfield College at that time, but they would accept only to the 25th year, and I was just over the 25th year. I enlisted and went to Paris Island, where I got my boot camp training, and then ended up in Washington. And I guess that was a brief stay because Pearl Harbor came shortly after I enlisted, and we ended up on recruiting duty. They used everybody at the Marine Corps schools and sent them out on recruiting duty. So I ended up out in Texas for another few months until they upped the age limit to 27 for being eligible for a commission. So I applied, and by the end of the following year, I had my commission and signed up for the parachute troops. I briefly spent my first years out in the South Pacific with the 1st Parachute Regiment. I was in the 3rd Battalion, and it seemed that was my story the rest of my career in the Marine Corps, at least during the World War II. We ended up out there and spent, of course, you know, the trials of the Solomon Islands, Guadalcanal, Bougainville, Vella La Vella, Choiseul. And after the mopping up was done in the islands, we returned, of course, to the States briefly and out to Camuella, where most of us were in the 5th Marine Division, and ended up training there until Iwo Jima. And that is the point at which I guess we're mostly interested. I must confess that I've sort of put that in the background. I don't think and haven't dwelled on it or talked about it or attended any reunions through the years. I have sort of buried that, and am here today to perhaps refresh my memory a bit. I can recall many things about that Iwo Jima invasion. I was there on D-Day, and it was pretty much as shown on the map. I don't know whether there is a map that will be portrayed, but we landed, of course, coming in over the beach as has been shown on your map here. I must say it was a fantastic, almost unbelievable adventure, as was suggested in the reading by Steve, where we had the bombardment that was just out of this world. We were all on our own coming into the island for D-Day, and as the dawn came up that day, we not only had a great deal by way of the aircraft going overhead and the bombardment by the many planes, but also the bombardment from the many ships. And it seemed that by the time we were making our landing that there could be nothing left on that island. Of course, we learned very shortly afterwards that that was a great show, but the island had been so well fortified and they were so well dug in that it didn't seem to make much difference, because as we came in and hit over the beaches, the Japanese were there in force and did fire, and the resulting casualties were unbelievable.
How old were you at the invasion, and what was your rank?
I was at the time 40, not 40, but I have to stop and think. 4 years after, I was 27 years old, 28 years old, and had spent, of course, my first years in preparation, not only at Camuella in Hawaii, but we'd had the entire 1st Parachute Regiment, you perhaps recall, was a basis for the formation of the 5th Marine Division. We used a battalion of the Parachute Regiment to be the basis for the each division in the 5th Marine Division.
We asked Mr. Tanner, why don't you tell us where you're from and what division you were in?
Well, we moved to San Diego, our family, in 1920, and I'm kind of a family of Marines. My dad was with the Marines at Chateau Thierry as a surgeon during World War I. My brother-in-law was killed in Guam. I have a son-in-law who was in the Marines at Khe Sanh, another brother-in-law that was in the Marines, so we've kind of been with Marines all along. I lived near the Marine base all during the 30s in San Diego. I played football 3 years against the Marine Recruit Depot, when those days had great football teams. Let's see, I was drafted in 1941, but I didn't go on active duty with the Marines until early in 42. I went to Quantico, went through OCS and ROC, was all set waiting for my orders to go to Guadalcanal with a platoon, and at the last minute, someone found out that I had quite a bit of math in college, so they put me in artillery school. Upon graduating from artillery school, I was assigned to Marine Corps School's training battery as an instructor, and we trained, we did shows for high echelon that came down from Washington, D.C. Also, I trained Dutch Royal Marines in artillery to go fight with General Stilwell in Burma. Then I was transferred, after that period of time, and I was transferred to Camp Pendleton with the 5th Marine Division. I was a commanding officer of Baker Battery, 1st Battalion, 13th Marines, had 75 pack howitzers. We did our last landing over by Las Pulgas Beach on Camp Pendleton, and the program was stopped because, lo and behold, on Highway 1 there was President Roosevelt with his son holding the door open. And we were assigned to go, the 2nd Battalion, 26th Marines it was, reinforced to go to Guam. They stopped the program right at that moment. We loaded up, went down to San Diego to go to Guam. On the berth next to us was Roosevelt, who was going to Pearl Harbor to meet with MacArthur to see what the next actions will be. We got to Pearl Harbor and they turned us around because Guam was pretty well secured by that time, just about. And we stayed there and trained in camp where Russ was at Camuella until time to go to Iwo. And we left on a LST. That was a 30-day trip. We never saw a thing except a seagull for 30 days. And on the landing, we were supposed to come in pretty late, being artillery, but things got so bad, they called us in early. And I was supposed to land on Red Beach 2, but there was no place to land because with my amphibious ducks, because there was so much litter, so many jeeps blown up. So I had to go around a rock, which was called Futatsu Rock, which was offshore for a couple of 100 yards, and came back in on Red Beach 1. It was, of course, as the sand here shows, and this black sand, it was very difficult to walk. You'd go up, particularly if you're wet. And as we went up the hill with our howitzers, we were being sniped at all the time. It was very difficult to lay the battery for direction. And that night, of course, that's another story.
How old were you and what was your rank?
I was captain and 24 when I landed, 25 when I got I was 24 25 2 days after the landing. I had a young Marine come up. He said, "This is a hell of a way to spend your 18th birthday, Captain." He says, "A hell of a way to spend your 25th too."
Mr. Hoy?
Well, I joined the Marine Corps in 1938, and I was, after going through boot camp at Parris Island, I was assigned sea duty, and I went on the USS Charleston, and we then went down to Panama, and we were part of what they call the Special Service Squadron, or commonly known as the Banana Fleet. And while I was down there, I got transferred to a four-stacker destroyer. We had down there the Tattnell and the I can't think of the other destroyer, but it was USS Charleston, USS Erie, and the Tattnell and this other destroyer. And there we patrolled all around the Central America, and we got involved before we got into the war of tracking German submarines and various German ships that were coming in and laying 55-gallon drums of diesel fuel for their submarines to be refueled. When I finished my tour there, I went back to Quantico, went to Ordnance School, and let's see now where to go. Oh, then I went to, I joined with the 4th Defense Battalion and Guantanamo Bay, and stayed there until, God, I don't remember the month, but anyhow, we left and went from Guantanamo Bay directly over to Pearl Harbor. And I arrived in Pearl Harbor on the 1st of December 1941. And of course, we all know what happened on the 7th.
Where were you on the 7th?
Well, we were in tents, and as near as I can remember, and I don't remember what the direction was, we were down pretty far off from where the big tank farm was there at the yard. And a lot of my friends were on liberty at the time. Unfortunately, I wasn't. And we were sent down to the docks to see what we could do. We had given 30 caliber machine guns, which were, as you know, not very effective against any flying planes. And I spent most of that day, after the initial hit, helping fish sailors and Marines out of the bay, there out of the harbor. And that was, as for a young Marine, a young kid, that was pretty devastating. And
How old were you at Pearl Harbor?
Pearl Harbor, 41, about 21 years old. Then I got transferred from the 4th Defense Battalion and was sent to the 1st Defense Battalion, and we were heading for Wake Island, and we got diverted and went down to Palomar Island. And let's see, I don't remember how long I was there, but I came back to Pearl, and there I got commissioned, a temporary commission, and was sent back to the States and went through school. I was down here at Camp Matthew for a while, and then I went back to Quantico. And then from Quantico, I went to the Camp Lejeune, and we started to establish then at that time with ammunition companies. This was when the first bunch of black Marines we had. We had white NCOs, and the regular listed were all black Marines, and our staff NCOs and the officers were all Caucasians. And I went from Quantico, went back to Pearl Harbor, and we had set up there an annex to the Lolo ammunition dump, naval ammunition dump there, and we had it out there at Makaha Valley. And I went from, was there, and when getting ready for the landing at Iwo, I was pulled out at the very last minute and was assigned to the Headquarters Battalion, 5th Marine Division. And there we made the landing, and I stayed on the island, though I was responsible there for checking the bad lots of ammunition, which there were quite a few. And I think shortly before Iwo, you had a big problem with the 4th Division over on Maui, I think it was, with short rounds, and I had sent over there and came back. And that primarily was my job there, although whenever I could join up, the beach was low, it was crowded, and wherever I could join up with anyone, why, I did so, but immediately got called back and got chewed out. And I lost one of my best friends there, Al Lick, chief warrant officer, and he'd gone down to the dump ahead of me, and he got killed on the way to the dump. And there it was pretty hard to find out where the front lines were, because as our troops advanced, they bypassed a lot of bunkers and what have you, and the next thing you know, they were getting fire from the rear as well as from the front.
What was your rank and your age on Iwo?
I was a first lieutenant, let's see, 1945, I was between 24 and 25, April 20, was when I was born.
Judge Lepardo? I'm sorry.
Not quite.
Go ahead.
I came back to the States and was assigned as what they called as a regimental commander. I was a captain at the time, as regimental commander of the retraining command in Norfolk, Virginia. And we had around approximately then a prison population or retraining command population, whatever you want to call it, of about 3,500 general court-martial prisoners. And there, and I had a temporary commission. That's when the Marine Corps was starting to cut back, and so I went back to Master Sergeant. And make a long story short, why I then was sent to China, primarily supposedly to clean up some ammunition problems over there, and ended up as being the supply chief of the for the engineer section of the 2nd Divisional Combat Service Group. And I was there when the communists kicked us out of China. We were stationed there at Tsingtao. Came back there, and I went to Camp Pendleton and became the supply chief of the 1st Weapons Battalion. And when Korea broke out, why, our battalion was disbanded, and I was sent over to form up the nucleus of the 1st Marines. And I had a Major Voorhees with me, Bill Voorhees, and I took my whole office with me, and Colonel Puller. We set up the nucleus, and I was responsible for ordering the supplies in for them, and that was no small task because we were getting reserves from all over the country, and nobody knew what they were bringing with them, but we managed. And as soon as the First Marines were formed, I got pulled back up to division headquarters as the division supply chief, and then we made the landing there at Incheon, Wamido, and I was served with them up to the reservoir.
Chosen?
I chose then, yeah. And my son was badly injured here in Fallbrook. He almost lost a leg because he got pinched between two cars, and I came back on a humanitarian transfer, and I stayed here, and I was back here about 4 months, and then I got recommissioned again. And that's pretty much it, to make a long story short.
Okay. Judge Lepardo, tell us where you're from and your enlistment in the Marines.
Well, I'm from Hoosick Falls, New York. It's a small town, about 5,000 people, 33 miles northeast of Albany, New York, and about 12 miles south west of Bennington, Vermont, about 16 miles south, directly west of Williamstown, Massachusetts. I entered the Marine Corps in the summer of 1942, and I was called to duty in October 1942, and I was put in the MOS, I think we call it, was the officer school. OCS. The Army calls it MOS. I'm sorry, I apologize.
No problem.
Yeah, and I went to Quantico and started in October and finished up in December, I think it was, late December, early January of 43. Then I was shipped to California, arrived here in about March of 1943, and they didn't know what to do with us. There were 18 of us. And just to show you how everything is so mechanized, and was at that time, when I graduated with my, well, when I finished my officer's school and was ready to be shipped out, there were 36 of us who were standing around, and they didn't know what to do with us. Some of the graduates were sent down to, what's that one, Anna?
MCRD?
No, down in the eastern base.
Lejeune?
Yes,
Yeah, Lejeune.
some were sent to Lejeune, and they went right overseas to Guadalcanal. 36 of us were assigned out here to California. When we landed in San Diego, and they put us in a camp called Camp Elliott. You can still see some of the buildings there. And they put us into a Bachelor Officers Club that first night. And the next morning they called us out, told us to get in the line and to count off. And then they said, all right, all the odd numbers step forward, please. Turn left and go over there and regroup where that big truck is, and you will receive further orders. Well, I was one of the people who had to stay back. And they said, now the rest of you folks go in and get your gear and come back out. Well, I got out a little bit early, and I heard the gunny sergeant and a master sergeant saying, what the hell are we going to do with these people? What are we going to do with 18 shavetails? And they talked out, they just had no idea what to do. And finally, one of them says, well, you know, they got a new base up the road a ways. He says, a new base? What's that? He says, well, it's called Pendleton, Camp Pendleton, I think. And he said, well, why don't we just send them up there? So they put us in the back end of the truck and bid us adieu, and where we headed for Camp Pendleton. We got to Camp Pendleton.
Now the other 18 guys went to Guadalcanal.
The other 18 guys were sent to Guadalcanal, and my unlucky group was sent to Camp Pendleton, and we got in we started off at the Lieutenant General Fegan's place, and it was up on the side of a hill, and his adjutant was a fellow named Laudenschlager, and he says, "What are we going to do with you people?" Okay, we didn't know, and he didn't know, and he asked the general, and the general says, "Put him someplace." And so they sent us out to BOQ 13, which was managed by a first lieutenant, and they called it a casual company. And when we reached there, he says, "What the hell am I supposed to do with you?" And we says, "We don't know." He says, "Well, all right." He says, "I'll assign you a berth," he says, "up at the BOQ and get you signed up so you get your money, and then I'll see what happens." So we all ended up in the BOQ. Now that was in March of '43, and they lost us. They literally lost us in the Marine Corps. From March of '43 until September of '43, 18 of us were poor little lost boys. We had to go on liberty all the time and dance with these girls who were sent down to help the poor troops, you know, who were fighting the war, and this literally went on until about the first part of September, when one morning a lieutenant colonel who lived over at 12 BOQ, where all the old people were living, came over to have breakfast at our BOQ with 13. And he came in, and I remember this very clearly, and he sat down there, and he had a newspaper, and as he looked around, his mess boy was pouring coffee for him. He looked around and he saw some women who were wearing Marine khakis, and their shirts were awfully big, and they were open, and you could see that they weren't quite fully dressed. And this colonel says to the mess boy, "Messman, what are those women doing here?" And he kept pouring, and he says, "What women, sir?" He says, "That woman, and that woman, and that woman." And he says, "I don't know, sir." Well, he had his breakfast, and away he went back to 12. Well, those women were people who had come up from Balboa Hospital and were to take care of all the poor, forlorn Marines who were abandoned in 13 BOQ, I guess. And they just didn't get the ride back to their base. But boy, Monday morning, Laudenschlager cut some orders, and all of us were spread out. And most of the half of us were sent to the 12 BOQ to be with the old people, and some of the old people were sent over to 13 so they could have the girls. And we worked there then, being assistant provost marshal for a while, and our job was to go down to where the general lived there. He used to live in the hotel, what's the name of that little town? Just outside of Oceanside. That hotel, remember?
North or south?
South.
Carlsbad?
Carlsbad Hotel. He lived in the Carlsbad
A lot
Hotel.
of them lived there.
He lived in the Carlsbad Hotel, and most of us had a job in series of being what's called assistant provost marshal. And when I was provost marshal, my job was to make sure that all of the officers who had too much to drink were put in the jeep and sent back to Camp Pendleton so that the general would not be upset, and to keep Marines from raising hell generally. And I can talk about that maybe a little later. Well, anyway, finally the word came out. The 5th Division was going to be formed, and all of us were going to be put in the 5th Division. And I was put in the 28th Marines, which was going to be commanded by Liversedge, Harry the Horse Liversedge, who was a very brave, hard-fighting Marine. He had been in the what the hell was he? Well, anyway. He had just come back from overseas. He had been with Carlson and others, and he got the 28th regiment, and I'd landed in his regiment. I was assigned to the 3rd Battalion, and I was made company commander of George Company, and for several weeks I was in charge of that company, getting it ready for combat. Suddenly we received another group of paratroopers who were sent in, some of whom knew Liversedge, some of whom did not, but they had all had combat pretty much. And I was immediately replaced because I was a junior company commander at the time. And the person who took my place was Robert Carney, who was a captain and was the son of a 3-star what the hell do you call him? Admiral, 3-star admiral. And I ended up being assigned as a company commander of the headquarters company for that battalion. Then we started getting ready to go overseas, and we boarded, and sometime in between September and September and October, I think it was, we all shipped out to Camowella, which is which was called Camp Tarawa, and it's at the top of the island, the big island
On Hawaii.
where the Hawaii, and it was the home of the Parker Ranch, that at that time was the 2nd largest cattle ranch in the whole United States. Then when we landed, since I was a company commander in headquarters, they detached me and made me a transport quartermaster for the purpose of loading the ship to go to, well, we didn't know what the place was going to be yet, but to land in combat. And the ship that I had to load was the USS Lubbock, and I was company commander and also transport quartermaster, and my job was to see to it that everybody on the Lubbock was taken care of, and all of his equipment was ready to go out with him when he went ashore. And we had tanks, we had heavy equipment, because we had artillery people with us, air spotters with us. And you see, that ship was supposed to be a fully prepared unit with infantry, with air support, artillery support, and all other necessary personnel to be a fully organized unit. And when we came close, we came right off the island. I had all my materials put off deck and down, and we were told the night before by our it was Terry McGovern. He was a Commodore, and we received communication that the shore was sound and would take wheeled vehicles. So all of us prepared to have our jeeps go in, our artillery units to go in, and ready to go. Well, it turns out that when our jeeps landed, they went down to the hubs, and within a matter of minutes, that whole beach was cluttered. And right above us to the left was Suribachi, and they had big caves, and in the caves they had artillery, and they would roll out the artillery, blast the shoreline, roll back in, and so on. In the meantime, we had the Navy, several cruisers. As a matter of fact, the New Yorker was right abreast of Suribachi, and it was hit, and it didn't roll over, it didn't go down front or back. It went straight down, just as though someone sat on it and shoved it down. And it took a terrible beating for several days until we controlled Suribachi, which was 4 days later. The fact that the shoreline was unable to take any wheeled vehicles completely stopped all of the offloading of materiel from ships. For example, from my ship, the Lubbock, inland, and other ships, including ships not only in the 5th Division, but in the 4th Division. Now, this didn't affect the 3rd Division because it was out on the water as a floating reserve. And finally, after about 4 days of this, Commodore McGovern called us over to his ship and said, "We got to get you," he says, "I've got to get out of here." He says, "I've got work to do." And he says, "We've got to get you people ashore, and we can't go ashore. And if we don't get you ashore, I can't get out of here." So he lined us up, and he says, "Now you, which one do you have?" And I says, "The Lubbock." He says, "All right, you look out there and you see that floating material there." Well, what it was a bunch of square steel boxes, and they were hitched together. He says, "You take all of your material and offload it onto that as fast as you can, and when you get through, you go ashore." Well,
So he wanted you to unload it onto the floating material and then take it to shore?
No, not take it ashore. Then I wasn't going to have any responsibility for it anymore. When I turned it over, that was his. And I was supposed to go ashore, and he was going to have somebody else take care of that. And he wanted to get his ships unloaded so that they could take off for another assignment. And in the meantime, I was aboard that ship, and I was unloading as fast as I could to get it onto those floating things, and stuff that material that wouldn't fit on those floating docks, I turned over to them. For example, I had two tanks, I had heavy equipment, I think it was a TD-14, and several other pieces of heavy equipment, and I offloaded it into an LCT.
Are you looking at an order? Show us your order.
Yes, this is an order I received the night before we went ashore. We went ashore on the 19th of February, and on the 18th I received this order from McGovern, and we were having a terrible problem. He wanted me to offload all my heavy material onto an LCM, wasn't it? An LCM, which would give me approximately 1.5 inches from gunnel to gunnel, and the ship was bouncing up and down, the LCM was bouncing up and down, and we were supposed to load a tank, for example, offload it from our rear hold, our aft hold, down into that thing, and I told him it was impossible, it couldn't be done. And this went on for several days of fighting, and finally he sent one of his aides in, who was a captain in the Marine Corps, and I took him in the aft hold, and I showed him what I had and what I had to do, and he says, "Oh, you can't do that." He says, "We'll have to get you something bigger than that." And that night, I received this order.
Read it to us.
The night before, so it's the evening of the 18th. It says, "Direct LCT 1289, which picks up 2 tanks from Belle Grove, to proceed direct to Lubbock," that's mine, after leaving Belle Grove, and load following: 1 TD9, 1 TD14, 1 2.5-ton truck, and 2 300-gallon water carts. All of these vehicles are in hold 5 aft. And I'll tell you, we were pretty happy people when we got that thing, because it would have been one heck of a mess. Well, anyway, so we would offload that material, and I don't know what he did with that. When I finished offloading all of the other material, jeeps and artillery and that sort of thing, and it was completely empty, I got clearance from the captain of the ship, of the Lubbock, and he released me. And then I went ashore, and by that time the flag had already been raised, and we had already received a copy of the small Time magazine that had the picture of the raising of the flag, and we had seen it for the first time. One of the things that I had happened to me that I don't think happened to very many people, unless they were also TQMs, was that from that first day when we sent people ashore, the injured people would be assigned to various ships, and several of them were assigned to my ship. And people from my regiment, my battalion, who only a few minutes before had gone ashore to fight, were coming back wounded, seriously wounded. I remember one person named Tom Mahoney. He was a lawyer from San Francisco, and he was a battalion. He was a platoon leader in I Company, 3rd Battalion, 28th Marines, and he came back and he was horribly wounded in the chest, and they raised him from an LCM, and when they got up to the gunwale, ready to bring him ashore, ready rather to bring him onto deck, the thing slipped and he went flat down into the bottom of that LCM and he blew wide open. Several of my friends who were injured were having a hard time, and they would all tell what was happening. Well, anyway, and then I went ashore, and when I went ashore, the first thing I had to do was report to my battalion commander, and at that time we were directly north, that's north, ain't it? Directly north of Suribachi. The battalion was all the way across from east to west.
Hold that up and show us.
This is Suribachi. This is where we landed. Then we went across. And what happened was I can't remember which. Yeah, I think the 1st Battalion was in reserve. The 2nd Battalion was going up one side, and the 3rd Battalion was going up the other side. See, and it happened that the 2nd Battalion was the one that got to the top of Suribachi first and planted the flag, and the 3rd Battalion didn't make it. After the flag had been planted, then we started back down and started to get ready to go north. And it was a very strange thing. As you know, Iwo Jima means Sulphur Island. And what was keeping the vehicles from being able to move was the fact that the sulfur couldn't take any weight, and if you walked on it, you'd go into it up at least halfway up to your knees. And at night, we had made foxholes so that for our protection, and we found out that the Japanese were dropping grenades into our foxholes, and we looked out, and every place we had a foxhole, there was a chimney of steam going up in the air. So when one of us would look out of the foxhole to find out what was going on, there were these. Didn't you remember that?
Yeah, sure.
Well, there were all these chimneys going up, and there's a holy Toledo. So didn't take us very long. We decided to put out trip flares. We put them out, and when those little rascals hit the wire, up went the flare, and they'd freeze, and then we'd kill them. Shouldn't have said that. We'd shoot at them. And so they stopped getting away with that. And then after a little while, we received orders to start going north.
Let's talk more about the landing. Everyone came over in transport ships, is that right?
Yeah.
No?
I came LST,
What is an LST?
landed ship
Ship
tank.
tank.
It held 1 battalion of artillery, or one battery, pardon me.
How many men are on these ships?
Oh, I don't know, we had 180 or 200 in my
Yeah,
company.
but that's a transport, Jack. It was
An
transport.
LST, no,
Well,
you're talking about an APA.
Well, yeah, an APA. Okay, tell them what an APA is.
You tell, I never was on when I was on LST.
Well, an APA was
Attack personnel.
was a Kaiser ship, and it would hold approximately, correct me if I'm wrong, 1600, and was about 550 to 600 feet long, and I don't know what its beam was, and its primary job was to get people from safe places to unsafe places.
How far offshore were the ships when the invasion occurred? Anybody?
Oh, I would probably know that because I was there. Those poor guys, those poor guys were going ashore with their eyes closed because, not because they were afraid or anything, but because the stuff, the water coming over, just was entrenching them, getting them wet and everything else, and they could see. But I could see what was going in because I was supposed to, when my people hit the shore, I had to send somebody else in until they stopped me. And so what they do is they get into a formation, like a V almost, and in they go.
These are the little landing craft.
Those are little. Some of them are LCVPs that carry about 36, and some of them, and some were LCMs or LSMs.
I had amphibious ducks.
LCM.
LCMs,
And the
which were
ducks.
larger and would carry more people, and then some of them were going in ducks, which were amphibious, weren't they?
Yes.
And they would come out of the water and go on shore, and they could keep going. They wouldn't.
Hopefully.
Well, did you?
Well, some of them sank.
Plus some,
Got stuck, yeah.
Well, some got stuck, and they couldn't go, and then everybody had to get out and get away. And those who went in LCVPs would just jump off the minute it hit and run up, you see.
Yeah, what happened about it, Steve, was that beach was very much like La Jolla Cove. There was no, it wasn't a gradual beach.
Yeah.
You jump out 10 feet out in the water, you're over your head.
Yeah.
Just like that. And then being wet and you hit that sand, you just had 100 pounds of sand dragging on you too. You couldn't move.
Yeah.
from the troop transports, we, as he suggested, formed up in units and went in waves, of course, to the beach. And we did try to get most of the personnel out at the beaches all right, but the problem was getting from the beaches up into position where you're reasonably protected. And it was a very difficult thing to, as he suggested, there was so much clogged equipment on the beaches to get up through to a safe position was very difficult. And that's where they had a chance to really inflict a great number of casualties. So I think from the troop transports in was pleasant enough, but once you hit the beaches again, then the real loss of personnel began.
No, that's never been really covered, but that's a real good point. When they went in, people went in, they not only had the difficulty of getting up and continuing on, but if they did start getting up and they got hit, they'd lose their officers, they'd lose their gunny sergeants, and there wasn't anyone to take care of them. And yet they had to do something. And the miracle of it was that despite all of the losses, and I saw, for example, some lieutenants who were platoon leaders who got hit and came back, and they didn't have, their platoons didn't have anyone to take care of them unless a sergeant just took over, you see. And that's what they did. That's the miracle of it. They did that. And they kept going. And they got all the way across. I don't know how you guys did it.
Well, you had to bring your tractors in to actually pull some of this equipment
Out of the way.
Out of the way, get it out of the way, so because you were moving very slowly because of this big pileup of equipment. And of course, they're looking right down our throats.
Yeah.
And you had no place to go. You were sitting duck.
Yeah.
How long did it take to get from the ships to the shore?
They had a line of departure, and you had to
Yeah.
you had to report to a flagship, so to speak, and then he'd set you off.
As a matter of fact, when you first went out, you didn't head in. You went to a rendezvous.
Yeah.
So, for example, if we were going to land, I remember my people went off about 4:30, 5 o'clock, and they went out to a rendezvous, and they just went around and around and around, and pretty soon one outfit was dispatched, and another outfit was dispatched, another outfit, and then another one, and another one. You see, like that. Isn't that right?
Yes, but one of the big
Waves
problems
is-
was though, when you went in by your waves, you were supposed, that wave was supposed to hit you, unload and supposed to move out of the way, but here the other wave was right in on top of you, and then the other one was right on top of you.
Yeah, didn't work out right.
Mr. Whipple, you landed on the first day?
I did. And I wasn't in the very first wave, but I don't recall how it worked out, but the 3rd Battalion, 26th Marines came somewhere out into the morning. And our difficulty was, as suggested here, getting across the beaches into a secure place where we could be moved up into a position where we could move to the line of combat. And our job was to move across this narrow part of the island and take up positions up on the line behind the first wave that went across in. And at that point, I think we did very well. We didn't lose too many casualties. When we began to lose casualties was when we began to move up to the first airport. And we used the revetments where they kept the airplanes initially, and as long as we stayed in those little revetments where they had built to protect the aircraft, we did very well. We began to lose our greatest number of people when we moved up out of those revetments to get up to the airport itself. And then we used different foxholes at that point. I remember when we had our battalion command post, if you will call it that. Actually, there was no real area that we could work except going from shell hole to shell hole. And we ended up in a shell hole just below the airport number 1 with the commanding officer and his staff. And I was the company commander at that time, and I had my own unit directly behind, but I was coming up to one of those shell holes immediately below the airport when I stepped into one of the shell holes, and we had an explosion that at that point killed our commanding officer, the executive officer, the operations officer, the G3, S3, and we lost all of our command at that point. I didn't realize it at the time. I came in and said, hey, this is too crowded for me. I got up out of the shell hole and said, I'm digging a foxhole over here. And I had hardly gotten out of that foxhole when a shell hit right into that, I say foxhole, right into that shell hole and killed almost the entire command for the battalion. And over at this point, I could see what had happened, and I thought I better get down and get a corpsman or somebody up here to help out. And fortunately, our intelligence officer was a pretty sharp little lieutenant who did contact the regiment and tried to get some more people up. They in turn moved over to a bigger shell hole below the airport number 1 and seemed to be all right for the time. But this is the way you quite quickly lose control of your units, and we were literally standing, holding in place until they could get reorganized at the regimental area and send a new commanding officer up. At that point, we held pretty much in position and didn't have much to do except to protect ourselves. And this was probably along about D+3. But it was a story of how life and how movement took place initially on the island of Vella Lavella. It was very difficult.
No.
Command was difficult.
Not
Not the Vella Lavella, yeah.
Iwo Jima.
Iwo Jima, I'm
Iwo Jima.
sorry.
Well,
Hold that
let me
map
ask you-
up and show us where you landed, please.
Well, the landing for all units is marked here. The 26th, the 5th Marine Division had the southern area here. We were pretty much below Mount Suribachi-yama, which was the end of the island here. And our landing took place across these beaches on this side. My regiment, the 3rd Battalion, came in at the lower part, moved across the island and went up on the west side.
Oh,
Mr. Tanner, show us where you landed, if you remember.
pretty much
I
it.
landed about the same place. We were about 100 yards apart, obviously, from the way we were talking. I supported, I landed, or supposed to land on Red Beach 2, but the beach was so clogged with machinery that you couldn't get in, so I had to go out and come around and land on 1, and which was not our beach really. It was really closer to you on the 26th Marines. But my outfit supported the 2nd Battalion, 27th Marines, and basically that's all for the first day anyway.
You landed on the first day?
Yeah.
About what time of day did you
Well,
land?
we got in around 1 o'clock.
And was it a non-stop process of material and personnel coming off
Well,
the ships?
pretty much what Russ said. You just did what you could. You had to play it. You had to play it by ear. All plans kind of went out the window. You just had to. You had to do what you could to survive and keep things going. And that night, the first night, Colonel Robertson was CO of the 2nd Battalion, 27th Marines. He later became the commanding officer at Camp Pendleton. And he was having problems with the enemy coming across Motoyama Airfield 1. And so he called for support for artillery. So we just fired at will, as many as we could pump out all the time. And
Pretty much hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah, it was.
It
in
was
many ways.
quite a bit. As a matter of fact, he was there 3 days trying to move, and actually they didn't start getting any of this equipment in until someone got the idea to get that metal stuff that they put
Marston
down.
matting, Marston matting or pure steel
Yeah,
planking, they
yeah,
call it,
yeah.
mats, yeah,
Yeah,
landing mats.
those airplane mats, and they would put them down and we'd go ahead a little bit and then put down some more and go ahead a little bit until finally we got up here south of that first airstrip that he's talking about. But that took an awful long time to do it. When I went ashore about I don't know the day, it was after the flag went up, it might have been the day after. When I went in, we could see all of that metal stuff there, and they were beginning to move. They were able to move inland, and also we had control of Suribachi, and the thing that helped us a great deal was ships on both sides shooting into those caves, you see, and blow them apart. And that's what helped us a lot.
Mr. Hoy, what day did you land? Do you remember?
I think about the 3rd day. I'm not real positive on that anymore. But anyhow, the thing is we went in, we think about you making a landing, you're moving in real quick. You moved in yards.
Yeah.
You're not a half a mile, and if you got 100 yards, you were doing
Yeah.
pretty darn good.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, they were dug in all over the island, and of course, we had not only volcanic ash, it was such a problem, you had that brush in there where they were able to hide their bunkers and what have you. And as our people moved forward, they had to bypass some of these things, and next thing you know, they're not only fighting up front, but you're getting fire from the rear.
And that's when we had to blow up all of those caves that were hidden by the brush that he's talking about. We had to sneak up on the side and blow up those things so that they couldn't see us and couldn't shoot out at us. But he's right. You'd move up a little bit and there were people shooting at you from
It was
the side.
almost a crawling job.
Yeah.
You'd make your way not only across the beach, but into small shell holes, mostly to get protection until you could find your way up. And just the mass of people that we had there, literally, of Marines moving our way up and edging yard by yard, in a sense, until we finally overran the first airstrip. And when that airstrip was gone, then we had a good move, as shown on the second line on this particular chart. It was almost as indicated in phases. Here was D-Day, this small space in here, and it wasn't until D+5 that we got up to here. But literally, this was yard by yard as a mass of troops moved up the island to get the airstrip number 1, and that was the first big success. And at that point, I remember we had organized a little bit by D+5, and we did have a headquarters established in one of the revetments where they normally kept the airplanes. But we had protection enough there where we could get organized for the first time. And this was after, of course, at the time we had lost our commanding officer who had been in this revetment below the airport, and we moved up on the top to make another move up when all of them were killed. The problem, of course, was to keep protected because the aerial weapons that they were used for anti-aircraft on these ships were turned around and faced down upon us. And they would use these anti-aircraft weapons and really point blank shoot at our positions below them. And the airport was just far enough where we could see it. But unfortunately, it also exposed them so that our aircraft and our weapons from ships could target in on them. And that made it possible for us again to move up. But it was slow, and the loss of personnel was unbelievable.
I had a little levity here. We were talking all this other stuff. As we were down on the beach, I don't know, it was about the fourth day, I guess it was, I don't remember. But I was talking to 3 other officers, and myself, and this young lieutenant came up, was standing there listening to us, and all of a sudden his helmet flopped off. And he reached down and he picked it up. We just looked at him. We kept on talking, and he's standing there holding it in his hand. And he turned it around. He saw a hole right through the damn helmet. And apparently, what had happened, it hit one of the rivets there that hold on headliner on, and it deflected it, and it went around. The bullet had gone around, and we didn't know of that at the time, but just grazed him coming out. He always had a little burn spot on his side head. But when he saw that hole, and we were kind of watching him, wondering what he was doing, his eyes got that big, and he says, "My God, I'm dead," and he fell over and fainted. When we picked it up, that's all he had, was just a little burn mark on his temple.
Would you believe that that could happen twice?
No.
When I was up here up north, when we captured Sumiko Sakai, the fellow who was the fellow in charge of the
Supplies?
no, he was in the comm section, and for sir, he was Kuribayashi's Kuribayashi's sergeant, either first sergeant or sergeant major, and he was in charge of the communication, and he decided he was going to give up. Well, I'd like to talk about that later when we get up north, but actually I got a phone call from Candy Johnson, one of my platoon leaders, about 5 o'clock in the morning. And the first question I heard from him was, "Theo, are we taking prisoners?" And I says, "What do you mean?" He says, "I got a guy here who wants to retire. Wants to give up, and he's got his hands on his head and he doesn't have any clothes on. Oh God damn it! A bullet just went through my helmet. A bullet just went through my helmet." And he bent over and picked up, and I says, "What are you talking about, Candy?" He says, "A bullet hit the front of my thing, turned it all the way around, went out the back." He says, "I'm not hurt or anything like that, but," he says, "that went right through my helmet and went right around my head." Now, that's almost the same thing, that and you.
In many things, I think, I know that when I was moving up to set up the command post after we'd succeeded in getting the first airstrip, I was up along the edge on the move up to airstrip number 2, but I had probably a ricocheted bullet, but it hit into my jacket, and I could feel it. It's like the hurt, and the same thing, but it did not penetrate. It went around my side and actually burned it, and I grabbed and ended up with a hot bullet in my hand.
Did you save it?
That happened. I didn't save it. I should have. I thought afterwards, gee, that was a funny thing. But many crazy things, and I'm sure that could have been one of our own bullets. I don't know, but it was a ricochet from someplace that didn't have the power to penetrate except to go through the shirt and burn
Go around.
on the way around. And it was lucky for many of us, and those of us who are still here, of course, lived under the right star, I guess, because I think we probably should have a little moment to pause and say, we're grateful that we're here because so many that we remember so well, particularly on Iwo Jima, are gone.
Boy, I said that a million times. I had 248 people in my company, and I had 243 people in my company, and I had 249 casualties, and some of them were hit 3 different times, and I was one of 11 of them who never once was hit. Never once.
I think that's the story for all of us.
Really?
Unbelievable. I think we had over 1,000 when we went in. I think there were some 800 replacements. We came out with 386 people.
It's just,
That was a story
I was
for each
lucky,
of us,
I'm
I'm
lucky it's
sure.
gotten worse. As a matter of fact, I never even got to shoot a shot. Never fired one weapon. I was too busy.
I think that's true for so many of us.
Yeah.
I remember going from I talked about getting organized enough in one of these revetments to actually move our battalion command post up along the side of the airstrip 2. And at that point I had to clean up, of course, and there were a great many casualties, dead Marines along the way. We even cleaned up a few dead Japanese too, but the problem was, and it was my job to set up the command post, and I would look at the dead bodies and think, oh my God, how do I do this, let's get them cleaned up. And I said, come on, let's do this, and nobody wanted to touch them, so I got in myself to try and clean up some of these bodies, and I take the arms and they would pull off.
Yeah.
And they would come apart, so we had to pick up ponchos, blankets, whatever we could do, move it up as much as we could, and roll as much as we could of the bodies into these ponchos and blankets and take them out. And of course, as was suggested, it's because the steam coming up through the volcanic ash and all literally steamed and cooked the casualties right in the foxholes or right on the ground where the steam seeped up and through. And it was a body by body maneuver to clean up enough of the space to get them out for the Graves Registration Bureau. They would pick them up sometimes days later. But for the most part, they did keep them moving back out and to the collecting point where they had the casualties.
That's never been talked about. You knew it, and we knew it. And I don't think I've ever seen it in a book or any account. Have you? I don't think so.
No, the steam, the first night I had a foxhole, I put my poncho in there, tried to get in it, you couldn't because it was so hot. The rubber of the poncho would burn you.
Yeah.
And then, but when you wanted to take your pork and egg yolks and just put it down and leave it there, and it was hot in a minute.
You could lay down for a minute and the steam coming up would burn you.
You said you had to set up the battalion command post for your company. Well, since I was a company commander of the headquarters company, that was my job. So every time, that's the first thing I had to do really when I got ashore. And then when we started to move up, I always had to go ahead and set up the command post because my guy wouldn't move in unless he had it all set. And one night, first or second night there, I was supposed to have the duty that night, and I was trying to keep covered because if anyone was going to shoot, I didn't want them to see my little old head. And my God, it was so hot. My butt was almost cooked, and I just had to keep moving from one spot to the other. Did you notice that?
You did.
Yeah.
Just like blowing through your sleeve with your breath, it gets hotter and hotter, and the steam did that to you, your whole...
Were any of you injured or hit during the battle?
I wasn't. I had a mortar gun land in my foxhole the day of the flag went up. I was a little different situation than the other people. I was all by myself on the island because the first day I lost my outfit, as this picture shows. And we had direct hits on the howitzers and on the ammunition.
Show us the picture.
This is a picture which was in Life magazine. This is one of my howitzers left. a friend of mine had these amphibious ducks coming up here with 105s to support, I think, the easy battery of your battalion, the 28th Marines, or your, yeah. And
Never seen that.
we lost all communications. I had no communications. I had no nothing. I had no one to give me orders. No one to. So I got a hold of the first sergeant, my executive officer, and I said, when we blow a whistle, we're going to retreat, advance in the opposite direction about 75 yards, which we did. We came over next to the 28th Marines, probably right behind the George and Easy battery. Were right there.
Yep.
Friends of mine.
Yes.
Not more than 100
I
yards back.
remember.
We came back there, my executive officer we both took our wallets out, took a look at our wives' pictures, because we thought this was it. And then we finally got communications, and I had nothing left, so they sent me I went to, on my own with a radio operator, walked up to the 2nd Battalion, 26 Marines. And I served with them most of the time. Once I was with Major Antonelli in the 2nd Battalion, the 27th, but most of the time I was with Joe Sayers, the 26 Marines. And they had the heaviest casualties there were, you know.
I know
They'd have people reporting in them, new people from the States. They didn't know who they were. So if you belong to this guy, you put friction tape this way on your helmet. If you belong to this guy, you put the friction tape this way. Didn't know who he was, but that at least told him who he belonged to. But being on your own was bad, because, you know, you're just going along with the radio operator, and then they had a lot of these spider traps up on the front lines. And
What's a spider trap?
well, like a manhole cover with a piece of brush on top of it, with a Japanese soldier underneath it on the ground. And all he had to do was move that side, and you're sitting in front of me, take shots at you.
Yeah.
And I was getting peppered, and there was one fellow in front of me. He drove into a hole, and just as he dove in, he got a bullet right through his thigh all the way. And I fell on top, and I gave him sulfa drug, wrapped him up, and the corpsman came and helped him. Then the next way up the trail, we were peppered by gunfire, rifle fire. We couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It was a misty day, and we looked over on this bank. There was a whole bunch of ponchos, of dead Marines covered with ponchos. Well, the Japanese had crawled in on top of the Marines and were firing at us. So we had to quickly take care of that. So a lot of these individual things would come up when you didn't have a unit, you know, except work with a headquarters of a certain battalion for firing missions, or with the company commanders and stuff. So it's kind of a lonely situation.
Yeah, and the interesting part of it is they were doing things that had never been done in war, in civilized, quote unquote, warfare before that.
Well,
So many of them were so well dug in good positions that they'd had time to really establish themselves in good positions. And I know that we, moving up, had many of our men killed simply because the snipers were so well dug in that no one could quite pick them out, and they would pick off individuals as they would come through. And we lost one of our company commanders that way, and of course, as I indicated, we lost the commanding officer of the battalion, Colonel Trotty, and the executive officer under Waters, and the three a day, but all at one time, just simply because they were dug in, and they did get them, particularly with the anti-aircraft weapons.
Well, I found out too, a lot of the Japanese would take Marine clothing and put it on. And they'd run by, you know, and you didn't know whether to shoot at them or not, because, you know, you didn't want to kill one of your own men, but they were in Marine uniforms. But, you know, that got scary when you couldn't fire them because you were afraid you'd kill one of your own men.
Mr. Tanner, would you hold up that picture again and point out Suribachi in the background, and maybe explain what's in the foreground a little bit?
Well, this is Mount Suribachi in the background, and
it was on the top of that where the flag was raised.
Right.
We'll talk about that later. But
yeah, and this here, I had 4 75mm pack howitzers. I got direct hits on 2 of them. All my ammunition went up, and this friend of mine had 105s back here, 105mm howitzers to support the 28th Marines. He was hit. His drivers were Black Army. They all ran for the beach, left him sitting there. So he spent the first night where we were getting peppered that night, and as I say, we were told to fire at will. And the next morning they knew where we were, and we just got plastered with shorts and longs, and pretty soon on target. And it just covered our area with mortars just completely. And we had, as someone else mentioned, someone was in a hole and they got hit in there. We had a lot of the people of ours were in this big naval gunfire hole, and the shells kept hitting in there, and we lost our ordnance officer, ammunition officer, and 4 reserves and everything else in there. So that's about that.
And as we moved up, even after they declared the island secure,
Yeah, well,
That was a laugh.
that was the worst thing ever. On the 14th, when they declared the island
Yeah.
secured for about the 10th time, Carl Bachman was killed, and they moved me
Oh.
off of the, the headquarters thing, into being company commander of his company, and those 14 days, from the 14th until the 25th or 6th, which was the last day, that was the hottest fire I've seen.
Yeah, well, the home front was, politics was giving them so much
Oh,
pressure to
geez.
secure that island. They said,
That
let's
was just
secure it. And they
awful.
secured it, went on for 2 more weeks.
That was,
I think the third command post that we set up, we had good positions and we're set up there actually at one of the Japanese gun positions where they were able to use their anti-aircraft weapon, and we moved in on that and thought it was well secured. And I think it was the second day, early in the morning, that up out of the ground in one of these holes came a Japanese with the white flag, but he was right there the entire time that we were moving in,
Yeah.
and had concealed himself very well into the underground tunnels, but came up with the white flag on, I think, the second day we were in that command post, right in our midst.
So he'd been there all along.
You know, I've been there the whole time.
where were you when the first B-29 landed? Remember, it came in, and one of its engines was smoking black, and it was tipped.
I can't tell you. I recall the story, but
Well, I was wondering. I happened to be right near one, just a little bit south of one, and I saw it come in, and I was just wondering by chance just where you were at that time.
I don't recall that incident.
Don't you?
I recall them
okay. All
talking
right.
about
Because
that.
I saw it, and everybody in this whole area just screamed and hollered when that thing, because that's why we went in,
Yeah.
so that we could have a place for these people to land, and there was one that was landing right in front of us. I was just wondering where you were.
I wasn't close enough to
Okay.
really observe.
All right.
That was the first B-29 that
First
landed?
B-29 came down? Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah, it was something.
And it landed, there were, how many airports?
Oh, well,
Two
no,
on
there
the
were
island?
actually, there was one there that was, we had to make serviceable, and then there's the second one here. And I don't think it was ever serviceable while we were there.
Not even the third one.
No.
They called it 3.
No, they
One
had
was
3 of them. Well, the third one wasn't, and the second one I don't think was either, was it? It was only the first one.
One was the only one.
Yeah.
One was the only one.
Hold that map up and show us.
This is airstrip number 1. That was the only one that I think was ever serviceable. This is number 2. That was not ever serviceable so far as I know. And this is airfield number 3, and I don't think that was ever serviceable. But does anyone happen to remember where we were on March 14th when Howlin' Mad said, we're secure? And that's when we were losing so many people you couldn't believe it.
Well, I was up around Nishi, or back of this bank. There was a big bluff up in here somewhere. I can't remember now, but or was that Hill 362?
I don't think it was that. I think you were back a little farther because we were
Back further.
catching.
Well, 362 was ahead of me. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't recall exactly where I was, but I know that we, at that point, were beginning to pick up a good many prisoners, many of them just
Yeah.
laborers that were
Yeah.
coming out, who were hiding themselves because they didn't want to be exposed, but they weren't actually the Japanese soldiers. They were other people that had just been brought in to dig some of the tunnels and do the work. And they would come out in platoons almost.
Well, they had
Eventually it
Korean
was
laborers
tough
too.
to
Korean
There.
laborers,
Korean
I think it
laborers,
was,
yeah.
We're not going in order now. We're just jumping ahead. We were up someplace in the area that is called airfield number 3, and actually there was a high spot there. There was a high spot between the ocean and that airfield.
Show
And
us.
Here's the ocean. Here's the airfield, and right in here there was a high spot, and it was my day off. By that I mean my company was out of combat, not fighting. 2 other people were in there, And we were just sitting there looking out over the ocean, and a lot of our ships were here because down here was kind of safe for the ships. And they were apparently loading some material onto this ship. And pretty soon we heard a shell going over us from this area over this way, you see. And a shell landed in the water not very far from one of these ships. And we figured, that's that ship, that artillery piece behind us. And pretty soon another one. Well, this time they were over a little farther. And you could see they were getting closer all the time on both sides. And we were wondering, and in a way we laughed, and the way we didn't laugh said, they're going to get hit. They're going to get hit if they don't get out of there. Well, they finally woke up, and they put a lot of fire in it, and I never saw a ship go backwards so fast in all my life. And you know, the last shot they took at it, doggone near hit the bow. But it didn't. It was funny. You can imagine laughing at something like that.
Let's talk about the flag raising. The flag was raised on February the 23rd. I think that was D+3 or D+4.
Four.
It was a Thursday, yeah.
Yeah, 4 days.
No, Thursday or Friday, I guess.
What do you remember about the flag going up?
Well, I remember because that night before it had drizzled. I was in this command post, the 2nd Battalion, 26 Marines, and it had drizzled that night, and everyone was getting up, shaking their ponchos out and trying to dry off. And one of the fellows put the aerial up on his radio. It hadn't been camouflaged, and the sun came up and hit it. And as soon as that hit, we caught it. It reflected, and they picked us up. And we got just murdered with mortars. I got a mortar dud in my hole. The colonel was hit, the commanding officer was hit, several of the other guys were hit. I heard someone say, Corpsman, Corpsman, and I looked around, this fellow was leaning against some of that brush which was prominent.
Yeah.
And there wasn't anyone there to speak even. There wasn't that much left to the person. And then someone said, look, there's the flag up on Suribachi. I turned around, and way back there you could see it. And that did give us all an inspiration, because things were at a low ebb. I mean, right then, we were just devastated by everything. And that gave us enough to pick us up and go on, but there wasn't many left in the command post there. All the officers changed hands, you know, and gosh.
I think the best part was that feeling that, hey, we don't have to worry about our back anymore.
Yeah, they were shooting at two sides.
Most of us were projected up the island, and one of the things that we were afraid of is possible shells coming down.
Yeah.
Of course, there still were some snipers back there, but still,
Oh boy.
we felt now we could look ahead to getting up to the northern end of the island. And it was a good feeling, but we didn't actually see it. I didn't.
No, I didn't see it either, and as a matter of fact, the first time I knew the flag was raised when I saw that little pony issue of Time magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And they used to come out in the States and they'd fly them over to us. It would almost get them a couple of days after. Remember that?
Yeah.
And I saw that and I said, oh my God. And in a way, I figured, oh boy, at least behind us we're all right. But you know, it wasn't so, because as I said, when I went ashore, those people were jumping in our, not jumping, but throwing these grenades in our foxholes. They could sneak out of more places. You saw that.
Well, the eeriest thing too was at night, they didn't know this operation, as you know, was going to last so long. It was going to last a week or 10 days.
Oh yeah.
And so the naval gunfires, flares were limited. We finally only got, I think we got 3 flares per hour per regimental front, which isn't much light once in a while.
I didn't even know it was that.
You know, it was just eerie out there. You know, you weren't come above ground after dark, and you'd hear groans, you know, and things like that with infiltrations of Japanese.
Did you notice? That a lot of your troops were being killed by a shot in the forehead, a shot in the throat or in the mouth, and one of the reasons is because people were smoking, and every time they took a drag, it would shine And those sons of guns were looking for that. And boy, we lost a lot of them. And we immediately issued an order, you can't smoke unless your head's underground, with, you know, poncho over your head.
Yeah.
I know that sometimes too, as you'd see one of those boys coming by that had a wound through the neck or something that had to be taken care of, but were finding their way out, you could have that feeling, he's gonna make it. And you thought to yourself, when does my turn come?
Yeah,
And those of us who were lucky didn't have a turn, but that was a constant thing there as you saw.
Being alone like that, I was on a lot of trails, you know, and I'd see a lot of that coming by, being helped back to the rear, back down to the beach. One fellow I knew him very well, he came by and his face was almost gone. He'd been a boxer, so he had a pug nose. And I never saw him later, but some of my friends said they saw him later after plastic surgery. He was a handsome man later on. He really fixed him up. His dad, as a matter of fact, was a general. But there was a lot of that on the trails. You'd see wounded be, you thought, God, they'd say to me that they were the lucky ones because they were getting help. And I couldn't believe it. They were just nothing left, and they were lucky, they thought, because they could get out of there. I had one guy in our outfit put his foot up on the edge of the foxhole and shot his toes off to get out. He got a general court-martial for that.
Oh.
But that's the way he got out of there. Got off the island anyway.
That's the hard way.
Yeah.
Now, Mr. Tanner, you know Angelo Bartelli, the Notre Dame quarterback. Didn't he serve on Iwo Jima?
Yeah, he did. He was with the 3rd Marine Division. I was at the regimental command post of the 27th Marines. I think it was Colonel Warnham was it. And wasn't it? Do you remember that name?
Warnham, yeah. Later became a general.
Yeah. And we pulled up, we probably made 100 yards, which was a big advance.
Well,
maybe too much. We pulled up which left our right flank exposed. I think the 3rd Division was there. And the general was very concerned about that being exposed there on the right. So he called for a runner to come over so he gives a word to get some support. And it happened to be Angelo Bartelli, first time that I'd met him. And later we became very good friends and are today very good friends.
He was probably a pretty good runner.
Yeah, better passer than a runner.
Tell us a little bit about the Japanese fortifications, the tunnels and the pillboxes and their defense structure.
Anybody can.
Well, I had one right behind this location here. There was one, and we couldn't figure out what was going on because we thought we'd secured the thing. But all the time we were getting sniper fire. All the time we'd go inside and we couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Later on, we got into the bunker, and there was a false wall between the outside wall and the inside wall, about this wide, where you could get inside, go down about 10 feet, and still see on the outside. But for all outside or inside appearances, there's just no way anyone could be in there. And that's what was going on. A lot of them were hiding that way.
I think I mentioned the instance of one of them coming out of a bunker where they had an aircraft weapon, and again, we'd been down in these holes before. We had gone into the web net where they had secured themselves when the bombardments were going on, and to look at it, you were satisfied all was secure and well, but there are little places that you don't see on a usual reconnaissance down through the web of underground revetments and caves. But somehow or other, they eluded us, and you had a great many people come out of the hills and the caves long after the island had been secured.
Oh, yeah.
As a matter of fact, the very last day I was there was what, March 25th or 6th or something like that, right down below air strip number 1, right in here.
Yeah.
Our battalion, our regiment was here, and we were going to go ashore that way. And that night, we slept through 250 Japanese who dug out.
Banzai attack.
Yeah, the dugout,
Yeah, I remember that.
And right next to the airport were a bunch of flyers who had come in
Down in the airport.
Yeah, some of them had come in on lamed B-29s, others were troops, and these 250 some odd people busted out of their caves and went in, tore down the tents and butchered, how many was
I don't
it?
know, I know it was a
It
lot.
was several hundred, well, 150 American troops in there that night. Well, those of us who just came out of the combat, we just slept right through it. And the next day we went ashore without knowing anything about it. Went onto our ship without knowing anything about it.
Well, those caves were fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
At the end of the thing, around 25th of March, we formed a skirmish line, actually
Okay.
practically held hands.
Where were you?
And covered, huh?
Where were you on the 25th?
Well, we came back along in here.
Yeah.
And,
Well, that's what we did too.
we've held hands practically. And but you know, they found people coming up out of there the next year even. In fact, they're still coming up out of
We
Guam.
probably are. Well, I'll tell you what I saw. We were up here past the third airfield, and there was a big high abutment, and we noticed we'd been getting shot at from the back, the left rear, and someone ordered fire to blow the whole side of this thing apart because they were shooting at us. And when I just happened to be standing right where I could see it near the airfield, and I
Was it
looked over.
cliff?
It was a cliff, a great big cliff, and it looked like nothing. But they decided they were going to blow, and they were blowing it from the top because there were some holes. Holes that the Japanese were hiding in, and so they blew it. When they did, the whole front of this thing, it must have been as big as a football field in length, and probably even if you took it on its side, it was that way in height. And the whole thing opened up, and down it slid, and there were several foxholes along the line, and in each foxhole there were two Japanese, face to face. And what they used to do was crawl up out, shoot somebody, and then get back in, see? And there they were. I could see them there, and when the front went off, it was just like they were standing still in air, and then almost down they came. They were all, they were in caves. They were
Right.
If you want to know about that sort of stuff, we can tell you some more things.
Tell me some more.
Well, we decided after a while when we got up here to use our flamethrowers from tanks. For example, the last time no, it wasn't the last time either. Well, one of the times, I tell you what happened. Bob Carney, the fellow who was killed on, I think it was March 14th, in whose place, no, that's wrong, strike that. Carl Bachman was CO of the Howe Company of the 3rd Battalion, and he was killed on the 14th of March. And I got his company, and
You were promoted to company commander?
yeah, well, I was already company commander, but of a what you call it, the
Headquarters?
company. Now I had a what you call it, a rifle company, and we were moving along this way, and they gave me 3 tanks. I don't know how many pieces of artillery you guys would give us, and out we went, and I used my tanks by. The tanks wouldn't go without the troops. That sounds kind of funny, but they would go, but they had to have the troops right alongside of them. You couldn't say that the tank went up there and they'd go up alone. They wouldn't do that because they were harmless. I mean, they were without protection, you see. And so we had to be right alongside them. They would get behind them, you see, and go by the side and get behind them. And we had the flamethrower. It went out, what, 250 feet, did it? Something like that.
One hell of a distance.
And what we would do is look at something that looked like it was infested with Japanese, and we'd let them go. And finally that day, we had a good day for us. We went way out there. And everybody was excited about it, and they took their little airplanes and they dropped flares to find out how far we had gone out. And everybody else up until then had pulled back after they had gone out. And I figured, thank God we're not going to do it, because we have to, that way we're fighting twice all the time, see? So I just, up we go, and I made them whole, and we held. And the next day, when we went by there were all of these Japanese guys that were hit by our flamethrowers. And the flames killed them right the way they were. Like, for example, if they were running like this, that's the way they died. You know, or if they had their hands like this, that's the way they died. And when you see them, there they were. The skin was burned off, but you could see their intestines and the whole works. And that's the way it was. And then they pulled me off of there. I'll tell you a story about Hermley now. They pulled me off of there, put somebody else in my place, and I was then put over into sort of a canyon over here.
Show us.
The canyon is over on the west side, and it was west of airfield number 3. And we were in there. Now somebody else was over here fighting where I had been fighting the day before, and I was holding. And then there's this great big canyon across from where I was sitting up high. There was a canyon, sitting up high, another canyon. And those rascals were shooting out of the caves at us. And so we got some bazookas, and we dug ourselves in, and all we had sticking out was the bazooka, and would shoot straight across the canyon right into into their cave, see? And we kept doing that all morning. Well, pretty soon I'm looking down rather, and there's a fella all by himself, but he had his hat on, his helmet, all by himself, and he was talking to somebody, and someone pointed up, and they were pointing at me. So he walks up, and he says, say, I'm looking for your company commander. I says, I'm the company commander. He says, geez, he says, you're kind of young, aren't you? I says, well, not too young to be here, I guess. And we talked a little bit. And those, see, now there, so he was right close, you know. See, we were here, and we were protected by my group here, and the other group here, and then here, you see. But we were shooting at those people who were in the caves across the valley. See what I mean?
Did any of you ever go in any of the caves or pillboxes after they were secured?
Well, I went to pillboxes, but not caves. You know.
What's a pillbox? Tell us about those.
Well, we had several types of one. Our battalion, as a matter of fact, formed a fire direction center down in one. This was underground one though, and you had to crawl in on your stomach down a long, narrow area. If you had claustrophobia, you'd never make
Oh,
it.
God.
And you could only one person at a time, just like a snake. You go down this long thing, you get down in, then you turn left, and then come out. Then you come into a little tiny room with about 4 feet, maybe 5. I couldn't stand it. 5 feet high, about 8 foot square, and that's where everyone was directing the fire from there. And you know, if anything ever lit on top of you, it all had it. But it was, I was glad to get out of some of those places. They were just, you want to get a breath.
Jeez, I don't know how you did that. I'd be scared.
My wife could never do it. She has
Oh,
claustrophobia.
it scared the hell out of me. I got to tell you one, and this is, you ought to go off the record because this is embarrassing. I got a call to come back to a battalion meeting of all the company commanders, and this pillbox was around outside. It wasn't way down, and yet what you had to do was bend down and get in, and you had to leave your piece outside. Because if you had a misfire in there, that thing would go around and kill 16 people, you see? So I put my little, carbine out there, And then we went, and the battalion commander told us what was going to happen next, and this is what the general wanted, and so on, and what Liversedge wanted, and so on. So everybody went out, and I had something else to say, and to the commander. I came out, and there was only one weapon left, and it was looked like my piece. So I reached out and took it on, put it on, and my runner was with me. And he looked at me and he says, "Skipper, that's not your piece." I says, "What?" He says, "That's not your piece." So we moved over to where my place was, and he took it. And it didn't even have what you call it in it. No
bolt?
No
Ammunition?
No ammunition. I had the what you call it shoved up in there, and it didn't. You know, what the hell do you call those green
Magazine.
The magazine was empty, and there wasn't even a what you call it, a bullet, a round. Thank you, a round in the chamber. And what you call it? It wasn't. And there I was walking around for a couple of weeks without things like that. Now, see, I didn't say that, but that actually happened. And geez, it was craziest thing. All right, you want to know what we did to the Japanese? Mind if I just jump a little bit and talk about my prisoner?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, this prisoner of war, have you heard this? Well, here's his picture. His name is Sumiko Sakai. No, his name was Taizo Sakai, and the woman with him here is Sumiko Sakai, his wife, and the little child there is their niece or nephew. And on the back side is a picture of his wife. Well, remember I told you about Candy Johnson, my platoon leader from Texas, that had the bullet go through his thing and turn around? Well, he sent him, I told him, I says, "Why don't you send him back up here?" He says, I said, "We'll take him." And it was about 5:30. So he came in, and by this time I had some clothes on him. And I tried to get the people from the battalion, the intelligence people, who supposedly could speak Japanese, and nobody would answer the phone. And there I was. I said, "What the hell am I going to do now?" Because if you can't get through battalion, you can't get through regiment, you know. And so he started talking Japanese to me, and I couldn't talk to him. And all at once he says, "Parlez-vous français?" I said, "Oui, un peu," and we started talking.
In French.
In French. And here's my battle order. It was 7th of March. Holy Toledo. I was there longer than I thought it was. Well, anyway,
That's getting old.
if you look at now, see. Here he says. I asked him how long he was here. He says about 3 jours, more than 3 days. He was in that area. And then I asked him where he had been before, and he says Nord-China, C-H-I-N-E, North China. See, that's where he was. And then I asked him a question that had to do with some figures, and geez, he's got it all written here. I don't remember what it was. But then he wrote here, Lentement, lentement. Parlez plus lentement, s'il vous plaît. Talk a little more slowly, if you please. I was talking to him. So then I tried to, and then over here, Le Japon est convaincu. Japan is conquered, he says. Well, then we were talking about various things, and what about this, and do you know about this? And he says, "Le journal ne viendait à Iwo Jima." The newspapers don't come here to Iwo, he says here, and I think that's about all. But anyway, while we were waiting for it to get light and for those people to wake up, I used him to help me blast caves, because they would come out before it became light, and you could hear them, you see. So I'd say to him, "Talk to him, tell him to come out. If you don't, tell him I'm going to blast them." So he says, they're crazy. He says, let's see if he didn't say it here. They're crazy. He says,
And you and he are speaking back and forth in
French, yeah. He says, they're fanatics, he says. They're fanatics, he says. And so anyway, I got him over here, and he could hear him. And he says, they're going to bonsai. I says, tell them if they bonsai, we're going to kill them. And so we had the mouth of the cave here. Then it dropped off a little bit, and then it dropped like that, and that's where I put in a 4, one of those light machine guns, and I set up all 4 light machine guns, aimed right into the thing, and so they accommodated this real well. Just about the time we got all set up, he says, come, and out they came. We just let go and got them all, because every one of them, he turned back, and he says, they're fanatics. They're fanatics. He says they're fanatics. Well, he did that for us, believe it or not, several times. Well, finally, it was getting to be kind of light, and I called back to the battalion, and the battalion answered. And I said, give me somebody in the 2 section. It says, I'm in the 2 sections. So I told him why. He says, oh, Christ's sake, let's get him back. So I put a guard on and sent him back to battalion. He told them a lot more because they could understand him in Japanese. And he says, geez, this guy, and he had told me that he was the sergeant major in the comm section, communication section, and he started telling me all about where the guy was. He'd been in North Carolina, they were here, they were there, and I'll tell you what he told us. I asked him what he knew about Iwo Jima, because at that time we knew we were going to go into Iwo Jima. That's a little teeny island, not very far from Iwo Jima. And he said, oh, don't go there. He says, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. He says, don't go there.
What's it say?
You know
Iwo
that?
Jima?
Well, what's that mean?
I don't know. How so?
These are your notes from interviewing the prisoner?
Yeah.
Right on the back.
Well, I'd save that for you. That's a collector's item for your family, too.
And the front, tell us what that is on the front. It says your battle orders of what date?
Headquarters, 5th Marine Division, here it is, 7 March 45, top secret. What the hell are you doing with this? Withdrawal from, oh, for Christ's sake, this is an order for withdrawal from target. Getting ready to go home on March 7th. Oh, jeez, what?
Premature there, weren't you?
And you actually left on, when, March 26th?
2056, wasn't it?
Yeah, I got aboard ship, and because of the guys jumping off the end of Catano Point up here, wherever it was,
Yeah.
the sharks were just thick all around. And I got aboard ship out here, and one of the sailors had a great big hook, put it on a big rope, threw it over the edge, and just like that, the shark almost pulled him over the edge.
Well, what was it, the 25th or 26th?
I think it's the 26th.
Yeah,
I don't have to review notes now. I can't remember. Gee,
It was.
50 years ago.
Tell us
No, I
what
can't even
these
remember you
photographs
say
are.
sometimes.
That's what I was talking about.
Where are
You
these
saw this,
photographs?
didn't you? You
No,
did this.
I haven't seen those.
Well, hold them up so the camera can see.
That's typical, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Little rock.
Who took these? Did you take these? Did you have a
Well,
who had a camera?
No, I didn't. But
Who
what
brought my
happened
camera?
was, here's what happened. When we weren't up front on our turn, let's say we had one hot day up there or 2 days, then they'd pull us out and put somebody else in, and then we would have to do stuff like this. we'd run around and blow them up. You know, they'd send us up a whole truckload of Bangalore torpedoes and would shove them in a cave.
Well, this picture was taken out of a bunker by a photographer inside looking out through it. He wasn't out in the open taking this. He was
Well, we didn't go in any
taking,
cave.
Yeah, he shouldn't have.
What we would do is push the stuff in,
Yeah.
you see, with the,
Yeah.
and then what we would do is blow them up by using the flame from the flamethrowers in the tanks, you see. That would go 250 yards or so, wouldn't it?
About 50
50 feet, 250 feet. And what we'd do, just shoot at it and then boom, and blow it up. And these are pictures of that kind of work that we did here. You can see the smoke up there. See, we're blowing one there, and we're back here, and then these other two are where we had blown caves.
This gives you a good idea of the difference in the terrain, though.
Yeah.
Or the rocks, you know, as opposed to the
Yeah.
volcanic ash.
Looks just like you, Russ.
Good days when it was all over. Haven't changed a bit.
Mr. Whipple, let's see your photograph. When was that taken?
It's rust.
That's on the back probably. 1945.
Probably just got back from Iwo Jima.
Yeah, it says middle of July, 45.
Who's this good-looking young man here?
That's right after I got my commission, which was sometime either in February or early part of March. And I had gone home to say goodbye to my folks, my mother, because I was going to go to California, and I didn't know what was going to happen. How did I know I was going to get stuck with all those women, you know? And so I had this picture taken, and I was getting on a bus in Albany on my way to my little hometown of Hoosick Falls, and the bus driver says, "What's that uniform?" I said, "How's that?" I said, "What's that uniform?" I looked at him kind of funny. He says, "Is it St. John's Academy?" He thought I was a student at St. John's Academy, and I says, "No, it's the Marine Corps." And he goes,
I got the same situation. Coming from Quantico to Pendleton, I stopped in Phoenix to get a pair of shoes. They thought I was in the Salvation Army.
yeah.
They just hadn't seen it.
They didn't even know
Yeah.
what the war was about.
No.
Did you encounter any other Japanese prisoners while you were on the island?
Only the one that came up in our CP, and he was picked up almost immediately.
How would you characterize the Japanese that you were fighting against? What kind of fighters were they?
They're very resourceful fighters.
yeah.
Resourceful, very fanatic. Never, of course, could they count on anything that would be normal, I guess. Hand-to-hand combat. I saw very little of them except when we were shooting at them.
Exactly.
And-
Exactly.
Had no fear of anything.
No.
Apparently no fear.
Yeah.
From our point of
From
view.
our point of view.
Well, I think their belief in the emperor was such that
Yeah, it was an honor
you know,
to-
it was an honor if you got
Yeah.
killed by you went to heaven or wherever they go.
One thing we haven't brought up is, did you have any contact with any of the Navajos? in your-
Yes.
That was a real interesting
yeah.
point.
That was
Navajo-
really
yeah.
that was really great. But
They
that
couldn't
was
break the code.
yeah. Well, that was mostly before we got
Yeah.
way up north.
Yeah.
But it was down here, and they were absolutely without fear. They had
These were American Navajos.
American Navajos.
But we're in the Marine Corps.
And for example, when we moved ahead, what we would have to do is get all our wire out, and then get a wire out to a platoon here, a platoon here, a platoon here, to a company out here, you see. And in addition, we had the 300s, those big radios, as well as the walkie-talkies. And you couldn't always have somebody with a big 300 on his back running down to the platoon or another company. So what you do is connect them up with wire, and they'd have this little wire thing about this big with a handle on it, and one end of it would be connected to the battalion, and the other was on this round gadget, and they'd hold on to it like this, and they'd go running, and then they'd just go running, and they weren't afraid of anything. And they'd get out where they were supposed to be, and then they'd check in to let us know, and we'd talk back and forth. And pretty soon, if there were some Japanese get on the line, you could tell. And pretty soon they'd be talking like as though they say, "What the hell's going on?" I didn't know that's what they were saying. And so, and strangely enough, you would think that when they heard these people talking, they would at least say, "Well, this is what it is, we're going to cut the wire." Do you know, other people may have had instances of wire being cut, but I don't remember wire being cut once when I was in charge of the what you call it, the headquarters company, and I had to set up the battalion post, you know.
What was the wire for? Why were the Navajos involved?
Well, they had, before we used Navajos, and this started way back in Guadalcanal, didn't it?
Yeah.
The Japanese had a lot of people who could speak English. As a matter of fact, were raised in America, or trained in America, or educated in America, and they could speak English. And so they'd connect onto one of the wires, and they'd hear what the people were saying back and forth. And doggone it if they didn't find out exactly what we were going to do and when and all that. Until someone got the bright idea, geez, we've got to do something else. And I don't know who it was, maybe these guys can tell you. Someone came up with the idea, let's use the Indians. Because they didn't know, they couldn't translate the Navajo, so we'd just tell them what to do. And boy, these guys were so damn brave, you just couldn't believe it. They'd just get their little reel and away they'd go. And they'd have one guy out there, of course, hearing, and another guy down here hearing, you see. And they'd translate, and the Japanese were madder than hell. But I don't remember, at least on Iwo Jima, I don't remember. I don't think we used them anywhere near as much as
South Pacific, I know they were.
Yeah.
in South
Very
Pacific. They used
valuable.
a lot, and I
Particularly
don't
out in
think
the hills.
I know we had them, and
Do you have any Dobermans with you? I know
No.
some of the outfits had Dobermans.
Yeah.
And I know Ernie Pyle, I have a picture of him.
Have
He came on the island. I have a picture of him. He was a famous war correspondent, later killed on Okinawa, I believe.
yeah, he
Yeah.
was, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. I don't even know whether we had to use those people because no, we
They
were.
used them to sniff out in the caves for prisoners
Yeah,
down there.
yeah. But I mean, I'm not even sure. We had them, the Navajos there, but I don't know that we could use them because we weren't all that far apart, for one thing, and we would use if they had somebody who could talk on a 300, they could have that same person, a Navajo, at the receiving end, just getting the stuff, you see. But in Guadalcanal, they had more distance, didn't they?
Oh, yeah.
And they had to be careful. And I don't think we had that.
We're so close,
Huh?
we're so close you didn't even have to whisper.
Yeah,
No, this was unusual. Never
it was
in the
completely different.
Yeah.
history of warfare have you had that kind of an operation.
Yes.
Why was it what was unusual about it?
The fact that you poured so many people into such a small island against such
5
a
miles
strongly
long.
fortified positions, and literally it was just a matter of overrunning with manpower.
We had over 80,000 there on the island.
And you just couldn't believe that kind of closeness in any kind of warfare. You're shoulder to shoulder and literally face-to-face combat. You didn't have the feeling like you did it was such a contrast from the South Pacific, for example, where we were doing island fighting and where we were taking patrols and going out into the hills trying to guide ourselves in our positions primarily by streams or by hilltops and seeing literally never an opponent, Japanese, unless we were surprised by some patrol or snipers that were out there. But here, this was literally shoulder to shoulder with your own people, foxhole to foxhole, and always somebody up in front that you were least expecting to be confronted by, but you didn't know where the next shot was coming from until finally you overrun caves and then you clean them out, literally inch by inch,
Yeah.
yard by yard, before in a mass of people really moving across an island that was dug in, fortified. And it was just unbelievable to have that kind of confrontation. No other place have you had this mass of people put into such a small point.
Did any of you folks see any of the Navajos running wire? Because I don't know, now I look back, I don't know that I've seen them run wire.
I didn't myself, no.
I don't think I did.
We had them there though, and I know they used them, but I didn't see them.
Well, I saw them on radios. I don't remember. Well, I did see them carrying wire, but that doesn't mean anything. They could carry wire just to go from me to my platoon, for example, one of my platoons or something like that. We had to have that because we never knew when the radio was going to work and not work.
I recall a good many comments about them when we were down in the South Pacific, but I don't recall anything on Iwo Jima.
Well, I don't come to think, but I saw them there. One of them raised the flag,
Yeah.
Ira Hayes. He was there, he raised the flag, and there were several others there.
I think he was a Pima, wasn't he?
Jeez, I don't know.
I
believe he was.
He wasn't
yes.
a Navajo, I think he was a Pima, but same deal,
Did you have air support during the battle?
There was a little bit early on, but
well,
didn't seem to be too much. I
No,
think it was beforehand.
At the beginning,
Yeah.
there was.
We had some of our own, what do they call them, observation planes, VMO or
What are they?
biplanes. One of my friends was shot down to observe observation over the enemy lines of our own people, But
Yeah, but they didn't use those until we had control of
Suribachi.
yeah, they didn't.
Did the Navy remain around the island during the fighting?
Only for a limited
Yeah.
period
Only
of time. The
Kind
big
of
stuff.
disappeared. The
Yeah,
only thing I remember-
it disappeared.
All I saw were the Red Cross ships out
Yeah.
taken back to Guam,
Yeah.
offshore
Yeah.
for wounded. But I don't know what happened to the.
Only the first couple of days, I think, and then they little by little began to move out.
Well, yeah.
There were hospital ships offshore,
Yeah.
Yes.
and the wounded would be evacuated out to the ships.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's because we had that and we're so close, and they were so close. We were
I think
able to
they
save a lot of
continued.
lives that way.
Continued with supply ships and hospital ships,
Yeah.
but battleships, cruisers, destroyers, all departed.
What about Navy corpsmen? They served with the
Oh,
Marines.
they're God's.
great.
They're God's
They were
angels.
good.
Yeah.
They are God's angels. I'll tell you, they don't have one bit of fear.
They're not even armed. They just go
No,
out.
they're not even armed. They
do
just
their
go out
job.
and they do it. They do it. They do it. What I'd like to say for the record is what I was telling these folks earlier. I wrote up only one person for the Congressional Medal of Honor, and it was this little corpsman. We were pretty close to our own front line, and somebody out there got hit. And he went running up there, and he went across the front line and got down there, and you see he was ministering to him. And he turned around and he started to lift him up, and just about the time he started to lift him up, he got hit, and down he went. And he started up again, and he got hit again, and a tall fellow who was Jack's spotter. He was a spotter for a little small airplane that was spotting places for us to drop artillery. And he went running out there, and he picked us. It was obvious that by this time that the fellow that the corpsman went out to save was all shot up. He was dead. And so this Johnson raced over and picked up this corpsman, picked him up and started to run back, and he got hit. And down he went. He came back up again, and he got hit again, and this time both of them were dead. But that corpsman just wouldn't stop. He just wouldn't stop. He just had to bind this guy up to stop him from bleeding. You could see that. We were close enough to see that. And then he wanted to get him back, and by God, he would give up. And you know, the Sons of Guns apparently thought that wasn't very important. I mean, it was too common, I guess. And they wouldn't give him the Congressional Medal of Honor. They gave him the Navy Cross, which is the second highest thing. But boy, I'll tell you, they're
A lot of them are the real heroes, yeah.
Oh, bravest people I've ever seen.
Well, I think there were more instances of where one Marine or a corpsman threw himself, where a grenade came in, he threw himself over the grenade, so his buddies didn't get killed. I think there's more instances of that in all the rest of the battles I know of put together.
Yeah. You know, I'll tell you, see what you want. And I know that I was a Marine, and I'm just so proud of the Marines from what I see. But the truth of the matter is, when those people are in combat, they are brave people. I didn't see anybody running away. I saw one guy, he had an A4 for me. It was a little light machine gun, air-cooled machine gun. And it was about, I don't know, maybe 29th or 30th day, which means we had still about 5 or 6 more days to go. And Mac, his name was McLaughlin, and he's turned around and he was walking back, and he had this thing over his shoulder, which means he hadn't fired it because it was, if it was hot, it would have burned him. And he was walking back, and I looked at him and I says, Mac, where are you going? He says, I can't do it anymore. Do what you want. He says, but I can't do this anymore. I'm going back. And I just couldn't see myself arresting him or grabbing him or anything else. I says, go get some rest. And he went back. Now, that's the only one I saw with my own eyes. But I saw another little thing, a fellow by the name of Corporal Larkin. I had 3 platoons, and one of my platoon leaders was a corporal. My officers were gone. And I had to make him a platoon leader because we lost all the officers. And we had to jump off. So he says, all right, we go. And he jumped off. He fell to the deck and he pounded it and he says, I can't do it. I just can't do it. So I got hold of my gunny sergeant, who I was using as an officer, really, kind of an assistant company commander, sort of. And then I said, who's close to him? And he answered, and I says, go see if he's all right. And he says, he's gone. He can't do anything. So I said, will you take the platoon? And he said he would. And that was it. But those are the only 2 things I knew. I sure felt sorry for poor Larkin.
It was tough to get a hold of the families.
Yeah.
Writing letters to the
Oh boy.
widows and so forth. Always
That's
got nice letters back from them.
I never had to accompany or be one to go out and tell a part of the family that someone of the relatives or family was gone, but I always felt sorry for the person who had to do that. That was a
Tough job.
difficult assignment. I guess this is a good time to, I think, say a word of thanks for all of us. We're lucky.
Oh, yeah.
Because 4 of us here probably represent, I don't know how many that are gone out there, people that that will never leave memory, or as is the case here, the memory of somebody that was there and is gone. And we're lucky. I don't know whether we have any way of commemorating, or maybe a word of silence or something, but how are we the lucky ones? Why?
Well, you never know, but it's a case that, unless you've been there,
Yeah.
you can't tell. And I remember an instance, and I guess right here in Fallbrook, where I overreacted. I used to belong to the Ritchie Club. I think you all know the Ritchie Club.
No.
Maybe you were there at that time. I don't know, Russ. I don't think you were physically present, but they were angry at the Marines. Something had happened, and the Marines were being badmouthed. And we'd have our meeting, and then we'd have a little program. So I decided, well, I'm going to let them see what the Marines went through. So I got a picture of a training film on Iwo Jima, which was actual footage during the fighting. And I showed it. Better than half the people had to walk out. They got sick. They just couldn't take it. And I just cut the film off. But I didn't hear them badmouth the Marines anymore.
I wasn't there. Sorry, I wasn't there.
I'm surprised you haven't heard of them. They were mad at me.
They know what this picture is.
We'll do that later. Why don't you show us
I'd like
this
to see
picture
that one
here?
there.
Oh, this, after,
Point them out, Phil. Who are they?
remember, yeah, well, remember I showed you this picture and it was to counterpoint? Well, actually, my only claim to fame is the fact that I was the last company commander to fight. We finished there, then we came on back and went down below the airport, the airstrip, and that was it. But right after they declared this thing secure there at Kitano Point, General Hermley wanted us all to have our picture taken together. And this is actually the 3rd Battalion, 28th Marines, with a few people from regiment. Let's see if I can see now. This is a fellow by the name of Parker Stortz. He was executive officer of the George Company, which was handled by Bob Carney, the admiral's son. Carney's not here. It's Parker Stortz. This is a fellow by the name of Petros, who was executive officer to the battalion commander, and he was a major. This is.
Petros just died recently, didn't he?
Oh, did he? Yeah. How far did he get?
Major General.
Major. Gee, he was a wonderful guy.
Yeah.
A wonderful guy. Very bright, very nice. This is myself, and then this is Liversedge, Colonel Liversedge. This was Hermley, right here, and he was the number 2 in the what you call it, the 5th Division.
ADC.
Yeah. This is Smoke, who was our regimental our battalion commander. This was just a minute. This one was the company commander of I Company. Just a minute. Rice, I think.
Young?
Huh?
Young?
No. Oh, who else? No, it's not Young.
Misty Rice?
Misty Rice. That's Misty Rice. He was company commander of I Company. And this is Captain Spangler, who was our 2 officer. 3 officer in battalion 3 officer. There you are.
What does that mean?
You mentioned Bob Carney.
Yeah. He's not
I'm
here.
trying to ring the bell on him. I went through ROTC with him, and we went through our parachute training together down
Yeah.
in Lejeune. But he was with us in the South Pacific with the parachute, right?
Yeah,
I know
he was.
he's-
And then he and a good bunch of these other people, remember they disbanded the parachute people.
Yeah.
They brought them back, and a big part of them were in the 5th Division.
Yeah, they used a battalion for each of
Yeah,
the,
yeah,
to form the regiments for
Yeah.
each of the,
yeah.
Now, where was this photograph taken?
Well, this was taken, all right. This is, what you call it, point.
Tano Point?
Yeah, Kitano Point, you see. And back right up here, near all of this stuff, you see, there's a big high spot, a big high spot. And so we climbed up to that high spot, and they took these pictures.
was that the end of March then?
Yeah, this was, as a
Going
matter
off?
of fact, I'll tell you what it was. It was the very last day that we fought after we secured the island. We had that picture. Then we came back, and we headed back to right here, down on the southwest side of the airstrip number 1. You see what I mean? And we were right practically on the water line. And between us, though, and the strip was the tent camp of all of the flyboys. Now, some of them, a good many of them, I guess, came down in their B-29s, and they were there until they finished fixing their B-29 so they could take off. And then other people were there to help run the facility and that sort of thing. And these people, these Japanese, had the whole thing planned. You see, the whole thing was networked with caves, and they were down below. And they could go from here all the way up to here, going in through this network. And they broke out, couldn't they?
Well, we used to hear the noise at night, and we thought they were driving trucks underneath us. That was the word that got around originally.
Well, boy, it's amazing how they got away with it. But anyway, they broke out, and they had almost every one of them had a saber, and they slashed open the tents, and they killed a whole host of Americans. And as I said, we all, the fellows who went down there in my outfit, were sound asleep, and of our whole battalion, as a matter of fact, were sound asleep. And we didn't know anything about it until just before we were ready to leave, and people were telling us, "Didn't you hear about this? Did you hear about that?"
That's what I heard, yeah.
And then they put us on, I think it was the President Adams was the vessel that took us away. And you know what happened, don't you? No, that was, never mind, forget that. So we went back to Hawaii then.
Yeah, we came back by Okinawa on Easter Sunday.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
I put so much out of that without sitting down doing a little reading or reviewing. Most of it is gone.
While we have this board out, why don't you show us and tell us some of these smaller photographs around the
Well,
side?
I'll tell you what they are. I told you I was a transport quartermaster. That's the fellow who loads a ship. And all of these pictures are me working with people who worked for me as a transport quartermaster. And I don't know how much you know about it, but what a transport quartermaster does is he takes over the ship, and the captain just has his people making sure you're not doing anything crazy. He takes over the ship, loads it according to certain plans, and he has to load it in such a way so that the last thing that's going on is going to be the first thing that goes off, you see? And that's how we got so mixed up when we were offloading. A lot of stuff they needed, and they couldn't have because we couldn't get it ashore. So that's it.
What is that aerial photograph that you're holding?
This?
Yes.
This is a photograph of Kitano Point, and where I put, you see, when they gave me this is, they showed me, they had a map, and they showed me where my area was going to be. See, right here. See? And I started right about at the top of those lines and came and fought down to the water. I didn't know that they were jumping off of the off
Yeah, some
into the
committed
water.
suicide.
They did. I didn't know that.
Now, these were your actual battle orders.
Yeah.
And it says here, this is an oblique photo taken at 1600 hours on 21 March 1945 from an altitude of 2,200 feet. And this was given to you as part of the operation to secure that canyon?
Yes, that's right. And we were the last people to actually fight before it was officially secured. And that was it. And then we came back, and an interesting thing happened. My 1st Battalion commander was Shepherd, a fellow by the name of Shepherd. And they used to call him Old Skinhead Shepherd.
I worked one day with him.
Well, okay.
The beginning of the operation.
He actually had been replaced about March 11th or 12th, because he kept telling what you call it, the liver sage, that it wouldn't do any good. You can't have a ravine running this way and go across the fire, the enfilade fire, because it's just to kill you see. And so we would have this artillery roll out at about 5 o'clock, and the minute it stopped, the Japanese would ready for us, and we'd go and they'd shoot out of the caves at us, and they'd just kill us to be hell. So finally, we had to hold it here, go around to the top of it, and go on down, you see. Well, anyway, when we had the island secured, Shepherd was given back his command, and he took charge immediately after this photograph, that big photograph. You notice he's not in it. Well, when we headed down, then he was given back his command for the purpose of taking us down to go aboard ship, you see. And that was not an indication of disgrace to him. He just thought it wasn't right to do it, and I know the Marines are supposed to do what they're told to do, but he just couldn't do it. He just could not do it. And when Smoke took over and says, all right, we're going to go, we lost a whole bunch of people. We lost a whole bunch of people, 2 or 3 days, and finally we had to stop and do it a different way. And so anyway, that's the way it was.
Any memories of the voyage home, or was home back to Hawaii?
Home was back to Hawaii.
Oh, I remember
Back to Hawaii for me.
we'd meet for bronze stars, silver stars, sitting there, who's going to
Yeah.
get what, more of a political thing.
Yeah, it sure was.
And, they're just, in other words, you give me one, I'll give you one, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Then I came back, and we were just off Okinawa, Easter Sunday, that was April 3rd, 1945. Got to Pearl Harbor on the 13th, I think, of April, and pulled up along the dock there in a little skiff, and the guy says, Truman's president, Roosevelt, just died. I think that was the 13th of April, 45. That's all I remember of the return trip.
Well, I was on aboard ship coming back to my island, Kamuela, when we heard that.
Well, I'd lost 35 pounds, hadn't eaten, all by myself, looking for a piece of candy or something laying on a trail to eat. And I'd lost 35 pounds, so I made up my mind I was going to eat before I got back to Pearl Harbor. And I ate so much I got sick,
When you stop to think about it, how you were alone all that time, you're just lucky you didn't look like a Japanese.
Yeah.
Well, I was with Marines here,
Yeah,
but I was alone on my own
Yeah.
to do whatever I wanted to do.
For how much of the time?
Oh, all the time.
The whole time?
Yeah, except for 4 days. I went up after this happened. I went up for 5 days, came back to battalion headquarters. There was a culvert, and I went into this culvert and said, I felt kind of sleepy. I woke up, I thought I'd been asleep for a week. It had only been 2 hours. This is time to go back to the front lines again, so I took off, and that was it. From then on, I was with the 27th and the 26th Marines.
What kind of food did they have for the troops?
Well, all I ever had was pork and egg yolks in sulfur, warming it up. And the big deal was if you ever find, gosh, there was hot dogs and beans in a can.
Sea rations.
Yeah, some kind of
Yeah. Gee, eggs? I never heard of eggs.
pork yolk and egg. Pork and egg yolks.
Canned rations.
Wasn't very, anything tasted pretty good.
I think everybody was pretty thin coming off the island.
Yeah.
But
Then
it was
there-
good to get aboard ship. Food
You know,
was
one
good.
thing I'll have to say, when I went aboard ship, I got in a spot that had about eight officers sleeping in it, and I was on the bottom, and I fell asleep, and I didn't wake up probably for 24 or 36 hours.
Mhm.
And after that, then I had my exec officer running it, and we'd meet each other aboard ship walking, taking exercise and so on. And if we could have canned the feelings, the expressions that people exchanged and how they talked to each other, we'd never have people fighting each other. Did you notice that? Everyone just seemed to think, boy, thanks for what you did for me. Thanks for what you did for me.
Well, my ship was full of wounded down below too in the hold.
Yeah.
All you had to do was go down there and
Yeah.
see how
Yeah.
you felt, how lucky you
Yeah.
were yourself.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I know I was angry when I got back, when you got to Maui, then I went over to Oahu again and back to the 10th Ammunition Company. And I hated that. I wanted to stay with the division. Boy, they didn't really let me. And
Yeah.
then actually when the war was over, then I got sent back to Maui with the 18th Service Battalion. And that's when they were trying to bring the 4th Division back so fast.
Yeah.
Cates still had the division.
I remember.
And they made me a supply officer. I'd never been a supply officer before. And they hadn't gone back into formal accountability, but they were sure pointing that direction at that time. And they started shipping all the ordnance equipment down, and they started opening up the boxes to check them out. And you know, you'd have say a box of BARs, and open it up to find a couple of broken bayonets and steel helmets in there. And ordnance officer, I forget his name now, the 4th Division, we went round and round and round. Case got into it, and I really got my butt chewed out, believe me.
Cates, Quake Cates was quite a guy. Speaking of General Herman, he finally moved to La Mesa. Do you know whatever happened to Master?
Well, you know, he was
lived in La Mesa.
he was dean of the USD Law School. Did you know that?
No, but he
Yeah.
went down there and started growing avocados too.
Yeah. But he was the dean of the law school at the University of San Diego.
He'd wander around up on the front lines without a helmet, with like just a carbine, and he had an aid by him. You know, everyone thought he was crazy.
Well,
He's not supposed to have been up there.
I
That's for other people.
I didn't see him with an aid, and I didn't see him with a carbine. He just had his
Showed-
hands in his pockets.
Showed up.
Yeah.
I don't know, when it was all over, I think there was a relaxation aboard ships, as was suggested, where you were comfortable at the same time. You had that feeling that it was done, and that you could sort of sit back and think a little bit about what took place. And it was not a tense period. Going over was all tense, all expectation.
Right, yeah.
Coming back, you let everything out, so to speak. The comments were about what had happened, how it had happened. Talked about some of the people who were gone, some of the people who you were going to write up for citations, and just feeling that it's over.
Yeah.
And how grateful you are, and what was ahead couldn't be other than good. You're looking forward to getting back.
I know that I have the picture of Catano Point hanging in my office, and
Oh, yeah.
I look at it almost every day. And when I feel I have some great problem, I look up at that picture, and I realize that I don't have any problems at all.
Yeah.
You know,
Do any of you have any memories that you'd care to share about how the battle changed you for the better, and lessons that you brought through life having served there?
Well, I think it made a man out of everybody for sure, because you learned to roll with the punches, and also you learned that life meant an awful lot. Also, it meant that you helped your fellow man to survive too.
I think you had the feeling that to have survived, to have come through that, you reached a point of I would say, I don't really want to call it numbness, but you knew that you couldn't let it get to you. You had to somehow or other go on and do what you had to do without really thinking about it, because there was no place for you to begin feeling sorry for yourself or to worry about the details, because it was there and you did what you had to do. And it was only when it was all over that you could finally let go. But I think anybody in combat reached that point where people dying beside you or being blown up or whatever it was, you couldn't let get to you. Otherwise I don't think would have survived. I think you arrived at that point where those things couldn't bother you. You had to go along and keep going. And I think once it was all over, then I think more than any other time we reached that point where you could.
You know, I'd like to add just a little something to that. Not only could you not let go, but you would appreciate the fact that that fella who just had to go around the corner to do something, not knowing what was there, put his life on the line right then and there, and 5 minutes after he was told to go around that corner, he was dead. You couldn't help but be thankful and appreciative of what he did for you. And you didn't feel sorry for yourself, because he did it for him and you and everybody else. You had to do it too. And you were very appreciative of the fact that everybody was so willing to put up their lives. I thought that was just that. It was just great.
Well, I noticed that, and I noticed that, you know, you take the big rough and tumble football player sometimes, he didn't have to be big. Some of the bravest guys were the little tiny guys in boot camp or over here at Pendleton, were the real heroes, some of them. You know, they really put their life out on the limb there.
Yeah.
Well, you certainly had an appreciation for people.
Yeah, right.
And it was a closeness, that camaraderie that developed that I don't think anyone that hasn't been through it will ever know it.
That's right. That's right.
And
Well, I think that's what the Marine Corps is all about.
Yeah.
There's no one else like it. There's nothing else like it.
well, I tell you, I think that's one of the reasons why the corpsmen were so great, because they had Marine Corps training
those
along with their medical training,
No, they were wonderful.
and they were
wonderful.
you couldn't ask for
They
anything.
were just those were wonderful.
Well, Mr. Whipple, why don't you tell us what you did after Iwo Jima? And
I think the first break I got, I took 5 days leave and went over to the Moana Hotel in Waikiki and took a deep breath and let the rest of the world go by. And then little by little, well, I think I sort of put myself together and the world together, but it was a getting away from it all. And I think that ultimately I got out as soon as I could. We, of course, got ready to go back over to the occupation forces in Japan, and I think we remember well that was an unusual experience also, but it was a more relaxing experience, one that you could face and do with the kind of confidence that you didn't dwell on when you were in combat. But I got out as soon as I could. I wasn't in Japan too long, I think only 2 or 3 weeks, and I got my points up where I could come back to the States, and I got out as soon as I could. And was out for some, not quite 2 years, and I had a job open up in Boston for a informational services officer, and I'd been trained somewhat in that, then ended up going back into the service after not quite 2 years. So I put in 22 years, but it was a great experience being back in. It was very different. got almost 5 years on what they call the CAD program, continuous active duty, year by year, just doing a job in the Marine Corps Reserve and recruiting district. And worked off a master's degree in public relations and thought I'd get back out, but the Korean War came along. I couldn't get out. So by the time the Korean War was over, I decided, well, I'll put in for a regular commission, and did that and was accepted and went back in as a captain, got a promotion later to major, and I retired as a major. So it was the line of least resistance in a way for me. I took what came and what I had to do and sort of moved on. And of course I end up here now in Fall with you guys, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. And I hope that maybe we have a chance to get together on something other than Iwo Jima, because that's one thing I've sort of buried. And I have not participated in reunions or gone to any of the military get-togethers, with the exception of one. And that was 2 years ago down in San Diego when I attended the Marine Parachute Regiment reunion down there. And they have one every year. But I've never gone to one. But this was one I thought, well, they're there, I'll go down. And I've never been to one since. And this was sort of a looking back at something I've sort of buried for many years, and I haven't thought much about it. I've tried to keep it out of my system because they're not things you dwell on. I mean, they're things you get away from, for me anyway. And but it was, I wouldn't say refreshing, but it's something that maybe we need to come back to on occasion and reflect a little bit about what it means.
Mr. Tanner?
Well, after Iwo, let's see, we came back to Hawaii. Almost immediately, we started training for Operation Olympic, the main landing on Kyushu. And so we were training for that for all along up till the time of, finally I'd loaded ship in Hilo to get ready to go. And that night I took my radio operator up on the saddle, or the lava beds up between Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea. To check out the radio. And we picked it up, the bomb had been dropped in Hiroshima. And they said that we wouldn't know, no one could go in there for at least 4 or 5 years because of radiation. Well, of course, that turned out to be. So almost immediately then, the ship was loaded, orders were scurried around in a hurry, and so instead of going for a military landing, we went for an occupational landing and went into Sasebo. I think that's where you went.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, that's where I landed.
And I was in Sasebo for a while, and then we went down to Isahaya, which was a kamikaze air base where they made all the coverings for the wings of the kamikaze airplanes. And I was in there, and I was in Nagasaki for a while. And then I became executive officer of 2nd Battalion, 2nd Marine Division, because all my people came home on points. I didn't have points. I was a regular officer, professional. And they said, well, now we're going to China for 4 years. I said, not me. I couldn't get out. You couldn't resign your commission. There was no such a thing as resigning. And my senior officers didn't want me to get out. So every time an order went into, they'd kick it back at Pearl Harbor because he had the adjutant make a little mistake and the orders got kicked back. So finally, about the 3rd time, I said, I want to get out. I had to separate from the service. No reserve, no nothing, just entirely separate. Finally, after, well, let's see, that was in July of '46, I got orders, or got word from Vandegrift, okay, so I came home and they told me to report into the recruit depot at San Diego, and if I didn't get orders before the 4th of July to report back again, if I didn't get my separation paper. On the 3rd of July, I got my papers separated.
When was it that they said, when did Vandegrift sign?
Well, it was,
what month was it?
it was in, well, that if I didn't get my
No,
separation.
when did you first go out? When did he first say?
Oh, heck, that was in April, 46, somewhere there. Yeah. And then after I got out of the service, I immediately wanted to get back in again. And they said, no, you'd have to go to the bottom of all the second lieutenants and you'd lose thousands of numbers. So I forgot that. And then people, when I was in Fallbridge, said, you got to take advantage of being at the next to Pendleton, go to the PX and stuff, you know. So I thought, well, I'll go back in the reserve. I just missed that. I went back, going to go back in, and Korea broke out. I would have been battalion commander, 105 Howitzer Battalion up in Chavez Ravine, where the Dodger Stadium is today. So I got out of that. Anyway, one of the fellows that worked with you, Pete Mulroney, had Easy Battery, I think, supporting 2nd Battalion, 28th. He became commanding officer of the 12th Marine Regiment at Guam. Korea, pardon me, in Korea. So some of my friends worked with your battalions. So that's the history of mine.
Mr.
Well, I
Hall?
covered a little bit where I went back to Oahu with the 10th and then went over to Maui with the 18th Service Battalion, and then finally when I came back to the States, and it was funny, it was 4 of us got back here at the same time, and Lou Days was one of the, he was the first lieutenant then. I don't think any of you remember him around here?
Days?
Lou Days.
D-A-Z-E?
Uh-huh.
Was he a tile man?
I don't know what he
Maybe
was.
not. There was a
But
guy
he
did
he retired as a colonel.
Okay. I think I know.
Becky Days was his
I
wife.
think I know, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
him.
Well, he was one of them that came back. We all headed east. You couldn't get a plane, you couldn't get a train, you couldn't get a bus. So we hired a car to take the 4 of us back to the East Coast. And that was quite interesting because rationing was still in effect, and we had more flat tires. We finally ended up, we had to cut the bead off the tires, one tire, and stuff inside of another one until we get to a point. And I don't remember this Indian reservation, but it was somewhere in Arizona that we stopped on because we had 3 flat tires. And these people took us in, and I've lost track of them over the years, but they fed us, bed us down, and that sometime early that next morning, the manager there, he went into town somewhere, and he had connections because he came back with 4 brand new tires, and they wouldn't take a penny from us except exactly what the tires cost. Anyhow, I got back to the States there, and I went first to the Philadelphia Navy Yard. We had the disciplinary barracks there, and that closed, and then I went to Norfolk to the retraining command. And there's where I really had a scare, because I walked into that thing and he says, "You're the regimental commander." I said, "What?" "You're going to be in charge of all the prisoners." And that was a funny time, because they were running 2 or 3 escapes a week.
Where was it?
In Norfolk, Virginia. And Bob Hyatt was the commanding officer. And so I stayed there and I had a temporary commission until they were on the cutbacks and everything. Then I reverted back to Master Sergeant. Long about that time, I had too much time to get out. So I went to Lejeune, and the next thing I know, I'm on my way to China. And because of my ordnance background, they had some munition problems over there in Tsingtao. And that was in Westpac. So I was sent over for that. I never did have a problem with any ammunition, but then I got assigned as the engineer supply officer of the 2nd Provisional Combat Service Group. And I stayed there, and I had my family over there with me, and then when the communists moved into Tsingtao, well, I put my wife aboard ship. They were fighting on the airstrip about 12 miles away. And I was in the last ship that got out.
What
and
year was that?
That was about 1949, I think it was, that I got back here in the States. And stationed here at Pendleton, we brought our stuff back, and my supply officer took off on leave. And I got stuck with disbanding the group. And that's when I got real acquainted with General Erskine. Because they had the amphibious museum there, Amtraks and what have you, and the ducks sitting out there. That's where I had all the gear packed that we bought back from China, and we were trying to turn them into the depot. And Erskine wanted that stuff turned in right now. They couldn't take it as fast as I could give it to them. And I got called up there, and I got lit on. And then I defended myself, and next thing I know, they got called in. But anyhow, the material got out. And let's see, where did I go from then? Oh, then I went to Special Weapons Battalion, which I mentioned before. And when Korea broke out, why, Special Weapons Battalion was disbanded, and I was sent over to set up the supply for the 1st Marines. And it was just 2 officers, and that was Chesty Puller and Bill Voorhees at that time. And when that was finished, why, I got sent up to the division, and then of course along came Korea. And I went through Korea up through the reservoir, and shortly after that, well, my son got hurt, and I got sent back to the States. And then I got commissioned. And then when, where do I go with that? Well, yeah, then I got sent to Japan, 1st Division. Over there, or 3rd Division, the occupation. Not the occupation there, but we were sitting there, and then we went on down and moved down to Okinawa. And I came back, and my 20 years were in, and I decided to retire, which I did. And I went to work for the Marine Corps in Philadelphia at the supply depot. I had the engineers supply there. And I worked for them for a few years, and then I transferred to the Defense Supply Agency. And I set up the distribution system for the Defense Supply Agency. If you don't know what that is, they took over control of all the common items for all the services, and they were responsible for, and we had the construction items, engineer type items, but that was a misnomer. And I think there I helped the Marine Corps more during Vietnam than if I'd been in the Marine Corps, because I was able to get items that they needed very desperately in a hurry. And I started there in supply. I ended up the Deputy Director of Procurement. And then I finally retired from there in '74 and been out here ever since.
Hey,
Judge Lepardo, what did you do after Iwo Jima?
well, the first thing we did is get some time off, and we all headed for the same place that he did, the Moana over there for about a couple of weeks, and I ran into a fellow by the name of Jimmy McPoland. Did you know Jimmy? Well, while I was going down this way, he was up on top of the hill going that way. He was a 2nd lieutenant, just turned 1st. I was a senior 1st, supposedly ready for 2nd. I mean for captain. And he stopped me, and he said, "Did you get your commission?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He says, "Well, I understand that you're going to be spot raised to captain, and I'm going to be spot raised to captain for what we did when we went down." And I said, "Well, hey." So I went back, and my battalion commander, the guy that didn't want to go down to the water and made me go down to the water, put the kibosh on it. And his battalion commander was a fellow named Fegan, and he got his. No.
Hey,
It was a colonel.
he took Trouty's place.
Oh.
He got his appointment to captain, and I didn't get anything. So anyway, that's the first thing that happened. And so, well, anyhow, I did have my company. And that was great, because it was a wonderful experience, and my people really thought I was pretty good. And I'll give you an example. We got our replacements in. We're getting ready now for the next operation, whatever it is. And these new guys were pretty salty. And I was kind of strict. And I was working them pretty hard. And a couple of them started mouthing off about that little pipsqueak up there in the tent, the big tent. We were living in tents. And my people got a hold of him. And they got him on the corner. And he says, "Don't you talk badly about him. If you do, we'll just kill you." Of course, they wouldn't do that. But they didn't let any of them sound off and say anything bad about me, because we had that same common, having worked together, in combat, and they knew that whatever we had worked. It worked for them and it worked for me, and I felt just great. I figured, boy, I'm going to be company commander. I don't have to worry anymore. Well, guess what happened? A guy by the name of Ty, a nice guy, a major of all things, was transferred to our battalion, and guess what he got? He got my company. Because I'm only a senior first lieutenant, and he gets my company. Well, anyway, so they made me assistant operations officer. Well, there's no such thing on the chart, you know, that. So I ended up being the operations officer, and old Spangler had a lot of fun. Well, then they dropped the bombs, and we were told in the 3rd Battalion, 28th Marines, that we were the only battalion that was combat loaded because we didn't know whether Japan was serious or not, and we landed in Sasebo. Now, maybe, were we on the same ship? Wonder what ship was it that you went on, you know?
I went to Sasebo on, gee, what was I? I can't remember. I know we got to the end of the harbor, opening like at Point Loma, very narrow.
Yeah.
And no one knew how to get in there. They sent out a pilot for us.
Yeah.
I said, well, this guy's expendable, you know. So as we went through the area, we kind of held our breath, and we finally got inside. There were ships all around, Japanese ships. But I don't know. We were there the first day, I know, and then we had to go in and be some warehouse.
Were there a lot of Japanese around?
Yeah.
Well, then you must have gone on you must have landed either before we did or after we did.
We were the first group that went through.
Because when we went in, all we saw was those great big 16-inchers on the pier there.
Yeah, I remember that.
Remember that?
Yeah.
And
Guns?
no people.
No.
Huh?
16-inch
Yeah.
guns?
Yeah. The
No
great
people
big
till
ones.
we got on shore, then there were some, yes.
No, well, I'm trying to say this. There weren't any. When we went in, there were no Japanese on the dirt, on land. None, for about 2 or 3 days, and they started coming out of the hills. So I was just wondering. Well, anyway, I guess we weren't the only people then that were loaded. Well,
Now, this is on mainland Japan.
Yeah.
And about
Kyushu.
And about when did you show up?
September, huh?
Yeah, 14th or somewhere along there.
Something like that in September. And our battalion was stationed there in Sasebo, or whatever they call it. And then they moved us up to Fukuoka. And then out of Fukuoka, they sent us up to the men's club up in Moji. And we were in charge of all of their high power stuff, their electric lights, and you know, all that stuff. And the battalion commander, by this time it was Smoke again. He didn't do very much, but have a lot of fun. And the operations officer, he was having a lot of fun. And they said, let's make Lepardo do it. So I was the guy who had all the work to do, and we had some very interesting experiences up there. And I want to tell you the funniest one. We had a guy named Schmidt. He was in the comm section, and those guys used to go out into the whorehouses, see. And all at once, there's a big hoorah outside, and I'm the operations officer, and nobody else is there. And I didn't want to know what was the matter. There was a bunch of prostitutes, and they had this one girl with her, and she started talking, and the translator says, "There's a man who came to see her last night from here, and he stole her kimono." Well, I was about to kick her ass out, and guess what? But the battalion commander, Smoke, shows up. He said, "What's this all about?" So I told him. And I says, "I think I will just kick their ass out to hell with them." I said, "I don't see any reason why we ought to believe them at this stage of the game." He says, "Oh no, let's have some fun." So he made the whole headquarters group fall out. And he had these women walk up the ranks to see which one it was. And there were about 5 or 6 prostitutes, and they got to Schmidt. And she's, so, and she threw her arms around him, and she hugged him, and she hugged him, she wouldn't let go. Well, it turned out he didn't steal anything. She liked what she got from him to such an extent that she wanted to marry him and take him back to where she worked and support him. Honest to God, that's the whole truth. And you can imagine the kind of life that guy had to live after that. That's exactly what happened. Well, anyway, we'd been there for a while, and then we came back down, ready to go home, and we came back down, and we went down to Nagasaki to see where the second bomb was dropped and all that sort of stuff. And by the way, you went there, didn't you? Mm-hmm. Did you see right in the middle of the whole thing this one, what you call it? What the hell's it? You know?
Chimney?
Chimney. Yeah. Did you see that one?
Yeah, and everything looked like an old erector set.
Yeah. Everything. That's exact. Everything had been shoved off to the side. Everything.
Even shadows.
Yeah.
On the pavement, shadows of where a person had been. It turned to grease. You know.
But that thing didn't go.
No.
I was wondering if I was the only one who saw that.
No, I saw it.
Well, anyway, so then it was time. My points were enough. It was time to go home. We get aboard the ship, and guess what? We got that big typhoon.
Oh God!
Remember that?
I remember
big
that
typhoon,
Oh,
and he was in the trough.
Yeah, I was with Bertelli in that typhoon.
On the way
home.
Was it the President Adams?
Well, I was on the head of the mine layers
Oh,
in all the Pacific, and I woke up one morning, went out on deck, and I looked out. I said, "That looks familiar." Or it was Suribachi. This guy, this admiral, had wanted to see Iwo Jima, so he'd gone about 800 miles out of his just to circle the island. And by that time, the army or whoever had shaved a lot off of the top of Suribachi. It was down about, took 100 feet or more off the top, and it looked funny because they had radar up on it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, this guy, he's in the trough. Well, it went so far over that he was shipping water on each side. And not only that, but those big reefers that they have in the wardrobes? They're strapped on with metal.
Yeah,
it went, just came right off. And finally, someone got to him, and he went straight into it instead of.
I'll never forget that trip back because Bertelli was a good Catholic, and I had another guy in there was kind of an atheist and was with us. So between the two, and that was the time that Lloyd Douglas had the robe.
Yeah,
the
I remember that.
And they argued about religion. But Bert and I didn't have any troops, but during that typhoon, everything had to be secured to the bulkhead,
Yeah.
And all you could get to eat was maybe a sandwich or a glass of water because no cooking.
That's
I tell you, I thought we were going to go over several.
Well, so did we, and I can't understand why the guy was in the trough as long as he was, but finally he headed up into the China Sea, and that was all right in comparison. Well, anyway, then we landed, and they got me out of there just as fast as they could, and by this time it was about I guess maybe the end of December, something like that. And somehow I got stuck with the duty to unload the ship. No, I still was called a transport quartermaster, see? And I'm over at Camp Pendleton, ready to be out. But we not permitted to leave the ship until the ship was unloaded, see? So we go out there, and there, down here in San Diego, were a whole bunch of men. They were the union. What's that union that was longshoremen. They had a whole big bunch of them there, and we were not going to be permitted to leave and go to Pendleton unless that ship was unloaded, because that skipper wanted to get the hell out and go someplace else, and the guy in charge, and it was a commander of the United States. He was in charge of these people, these civilians, and he says, "It's going to take us 3 to 4 days to unload this thing." And I said, "Oh, that's crazy. We can unload that thing real fast." And he says, "No, you can't." So I went up and I talked to the skipper, and he knew me because I had loaded the ship. And I told him what we had, and he says, "You want to unload this ship?" He says, "You watch." So he gets in the commander, and he says, "Now why can't we unload this ship?" He says, well, they belong to a union, and it's going to be so-and-so, and it's going to take so long, and it's going to be about 3.5 days. He says, I don't think so. He says, tell your people to sit down. He says to me, now, Lieutenant, can you unload this ship? I said, yes, sir. And I got my troops. I says, now, here's what the situation is. If they do it, it's going to take us 3.5 days. If we do it, we ought to be able to do it in less time than it took us to load to come here. We got started. And we started in the morning, and by evening we were finished. Mm-hmm. I had those booms going left and right like you can't see it, and Jesus, it was coming down, and we were all through. Bang! Before the end of the day, we were on our way into Camp Pendleton, and those Navy, those what you call it, those Union people didn't like us very much. Well, anyway, so when we got to Camp Pendleton, they washed me out very, very quick. It only took a matter of minutes. And I said, what the hell am I going to do now? I can't go to law school because it's too cold back there and there's a lot of snow. So I decided to go over to SC and see if I couldn't get a master's degree in international relations, because I thought that I had taken several languages and I could handle them pretty well. And I thought it'd be a nice idea. Then I could go back to law school and take international law. And between having a master's from SC and international law from Harvard, why, that'd be great, you see. So I said, how long's it going to take? And he says, oh, a year and a half residence. And I said, oh, geez, I got to go back to law school. And I said, in September or October, I can't do that. And they said, well, that's what you have to do. You got all these subjects you have to take. Well, guess what? Just by chance, the stuff that I had to take, the courses I had to take, I could take in the daytime and then the nighttime, and I could get everything done in 9 months. I could take double courses, take all day courses and all the night courses, see? So I walked in, and there was this lady there, and I said, now I have to take all these courses, right? And she marked them up. I says, yep, yep. She says, yep, yep, yep. And I said, how about this? Yep, yep. And I says, and if I take all those courses, then I can get my master's, can I? She says, yep. And she signed me up, yes, sir, boy, and that was it. And I got the GI going, and so I got started. Nobody knew that I was taking a double course. Mm-hmm. All day and then all night. And God, I didn't have any trouble at all. And so they found out that I was doing a double course, and I can't do that. And I says, oh, you promised me, and I've been taking all of these courses, you got to do it, and I'm going to go back to Harvard Law School in October, I says, or September, October, I says, you got to let me do it. And so they said, well, don't tell anybody. So I finished my courses, but guess what? My thesis was going to be the development of international understanding through the use of the U.S. radio. And that's that radio program we had going to all the countries, remember?
Yeah, I can't remember now.
And the OWI was running it. Well, what happened was this. I had for my thesis, I had the part before the war, and I had the part after the war, but I didn't have what the OWI did. So they promised me at SC that if we wrote to the OWI with their influence, that I would get that material. So I wrote to them, and they said, oh, we've shut down the OWI. The State Department has it. And so I wrote to the State Department. The State Department says, oh, that's classified stuff. We can't let you have it. And I says, my God, how am I going to get my degree? I've worked hard, done all of this stuff. And I says, I got the beginning, and I got the end, and I don't have the middle, and now what am I going to do? It's too late to start another thesis because I got to go back and go to law school. And they said, gee, isn't that too bad? and so I never got my master's degree, mm-hmm. But I finished all of the requirements and everything else. Mm-hmm. Well, then I went back to law school, and that was a factory by this time. Everybody, all the GIs mm-hmm. were there, and it was just completely different from what it was back in 1941 when I first went there before the war. And so I went back and started in I think it was either late September or early October, and that is 1966. No, not 66. That's crazy. 1946. 46, isn't it? Yeah, mm-hmm. 46. January 46. I got back. So I started in September or October of 46. And in September of 48, I had gone through 2 years of law school. And so I graduated in September, and I came out and I got a job here in LA practicing law. Mm-hmm. And then here I am. I practiced in LA for 13 years, and then I came down to Escondido and I practiced there for 10 years, and then I was a judge from 1971 until 1987, and I've been a rent-a judge ever since.
Rent judge.
So that's what happened.
Let me just ask you a few memories of the occupation of Japan. What did you think of the Japanese people after the war?
Well, I think I must have been in a different typhoon than you, because I came home after you did.
Oh,
So-
oh, you did? I came home. I landed in December of. Was it 45? I
No, I
guess.
came home in spring of 46.
Oh,
But we got
okay.
into the same type of typhoon.
All right.
Well, let's see, I was in Sasebo at the Hui powder dump, is called, and we'd take all the ammunition back in caves, put them on pallets and load them up on ship and take them out to sea and dump them. That was one of our big projects. Also in that Spearhead book there, or wherever it is, in one of the sections on the occupation, there's a picture of a fellow, he's a Swiss watchmaker down in Nagasaki. His name was Zillig. And I was on a patrol way up in the hills outside of Sasebo one day, and I knocked on this door. We were supposed to go into anything but shrines. You couldn't take anything out of a
you
shrine.
couldn't take-
But any place else, including schools, confiscate anything that had to do with warfare.
Yeah.
Pictures of battleships, guns, or anything like that. I went up this one place, and I knocked on the door, and this little Japanese lady comes up, you know, and hustle, and we would go in the house. And here's this old fellow sitting on the floor, and his picture's in there. He'd been taken by the Japanese from Nagasaki and put in internment camp, you know. So I reported to headquarters, and they went up and got him. And some other outfit got all the credit for it, but he's in there.
Yeah.
But from then one night up in then from Sasebo, I finally was transferred down to the 2nd Marine Division at a place called Isahaya, which was outside of Nagasaki, where they had all the coverings for the kamikaze airplane. And one of the first nights we were there, my CO was from the south, and on New Year's Eve he put the Confederate flag up. And boy, this little village went bananas because they thought it was a Russian flag, and they just, after the war, they were afraid that Russia was going to take them over, you know. So it was a hard time calming them all down. Then I got appointed to a board of investigation by the commanding general to investigate a loss of a amphibious duck carrying beer from south of a town in the southern part of Kyushu, most southern part of Kyushu, over to an island. It never arrived on the other island. And there were 7 men in it. One fellow washed ashore, all bitten up by fish, you know. The others never knew what happened. So I was headed up to do that. I went down to this island, and of course the Japanese police were not very cooperative. In fact, they're just, this is right after, you know, close after the end of the war. And we were down there for, it seemed like months. And then finally I was head of the Board of Investigation, then I became the recorder of the board, where
Yeah.
I'd ask a question that I answered, and I had to write it down along, doing everything, you know. And so then we finally had to, it turned out that one of the Marine officers on this boat that went over became a defendant because he didn't have anyone put life jackets on. And they all went down, and they were afraid to go down and look around because of mines still in this area. And so finally they concluded that it must have been what do you call it? Not a whirlwind, but a,
Typhoon?
well, no, it sucks you down, you know.
I don't know.
Whirlpool, yeah. Anyway, so then I had to spend days and days in Nagasaki drawing up all the reports to go to headquarters, because it became a very involved thing with family and everything else. Why did this happen? And to this day, no one ever, I've got all the transcripts at home, they're this thick, very interesting to read. But so that was about my experience in Nagasaki, was spending so much time there, you know.
Was there any fear of radiation at that point in Nagasaki because of the
There
bomb?
could have been, but no one thought about it until this day. My wife still wonders, you know, because the effects were, I went into several hospitals, and you know, all the little kids were all bandaged and bound up, you know, and this, and then you, as I said, you could still see the outline of a person on a cement sidewalk or things like that where they'd been. People.
My experience was rather brief there. I had points, so I was there for a small time in Nagasaki, as a matter of fact, as a senior patrol officer, and I had my headquarters there in the police chief's office. They were very cooperative. They bow and bend and bring tea in on the hour, and I would take my patrols and go out and through the streets and make sure that the Marines were behaving themselves and made sure that the curfew was enforced and that they were back where they were supposed to be at night. Of course, there were always some to swim across the river and get in. For the most part, I didn't have any specific occasions to apprehend anybody, and the people, as I saw them, were very, very pleasant, very nice, trying to please, do what they could do to make things work out well. And my impression at that time was they were very submissive and very willing to do what they had to do. And no unusual experiences that I could report. I was glad to leave on time, and I was given a rifle at the time I left, and while I was back with the battalion, why we did a great deal by way of reviewing the equipment that was being disposed of, including the weapons, which we received one when we went out. And I think it was just a very pleasant experience with the Japanese at that time. Different way of life. And all
Did you
very
finish yours?
submissive, all depressed.
Yeah, I wasn't in the occupation.
Oh, you weren't?
And
Well, I forgot to tell you something. When we were on Iwo Jima, all I could think of is we've got an adversary here that we don't see 90% of the time. Oh, we might see a few of them, but you don't see them very often. And all I could think of is we've got to kill as many as we can, as fast as we can, so we can get the hell home. And that's all I could think about. And I was wondering, what kind of an experience was it going to be in Japan? I didn't have any idea. Well, after I got there and I saw how they cooperated, and I ran into so many American Japanese who were over there, like Mary Yamaguchi, who used to work for Ito's grocery up in Glendale, and so many other people, that I got to respect them, because though they fought as hard as they could fight, and they sure tried to kill us, and they didn't like us very much, the fact remains they were keeping their bargain. No riots, no anything. Boy, it was just fine, and I was very glad to have that experience at the end of the war, because I would have had a very, very bitter feeling about them.
I had a good experience with it too, except for the some young people. I had my Jeep, and I'd get out my little dictionary, trying to find direction to somewhere, and I'm trying to get Japanese out. And they'd laugh, you know, pretty soon they'd come back, oh, see, you go down there 1 block and turn to the left. But, you know, I said, why didn't you tell me that in the first place?
Well, I was lucky. See, I'd like to say and tell one thing about what happened to me in Los Angeles. Well, after I came out and started to practice law, the war started. I mean, the Korean thing, you see, and I said, what the hell am I going to do? I was a major in the reserve, and all of my buddies who had stayed in the active reserve were going out, but they were looking for people. So I decided to call, and the fellow who was in charge of Los Angeles area was Skinhead Shepherd, the guy who had been my commander, and I identified myself. He said, oh, what do you want there, Lepardo? And I says, well, I'm practicing law now, and I'd like to have my number changed to law instead of infantry. You know, Jesus, one thing I didn't want to do is go out there and fight in the dirt. So he says, oh yeah, well let me just tell you something there, Major Lepardo. It so happens we know what you can do in war, but we don't know what kind of lawyer you are. Well, that's like hell, because he had me doing all kinds of court-martials left and right all over the place. But anyway, that's what he said, and he says, no, that's what you're going to be. Well, God, I said, that's terrible, because all my friends were going overseas, just left and right. And anyway, I decided to find out. He says, by the way, I says, what's my what you call it? What do you call those numbers?
MOS.
What's my MOS? He says, just a minute, I'll find out. He says, you're such and such. And guess what I was? Radiological warfare. And guess how I got that? Well, when I was at Camp Pendleton waiting to get into an outfit, they decided to send 30 of us up to a chemical warfare school at Camp Beale outside of Marysville. And so when I was getting out, since I didn't have a company and they didn't have a TO for an operations officer, they had to find something for me to put there. So it says, oh, look at this, radiology and chemical warfare. Boy, that's what we'll make. And that's what they made me. See? Okay. Now, when I found that out, I says, oh, this is just great. So I decided, I waited a couple of days, and I called back up there, Skinhead's place, and I said, say, I says, I've got an MOS in here, and I'm just wondering what my chances are, if I can, I'm going to be lucky enough to be able to get into this thing, I says. So I told him, and he says, let me see. He says, oh, there's not a chance in the world, he says. Good God, you've already got the rank of a major. What are they going to be using? Hell, we've got so many of these people who are doing this already for regiments and what you call it? What the hell? What's next above? That's one thing.
Battalion?
Huh?
Brigade?
Division. Jeez, when do you guys get old? Well, then he says, we've got so many of these people here, he says, that there's no way in the world we'll ever call you. You just go sit on your fanny and cool off. There's no way in the world. I said, oh, gee whiz, isn't that a shame? And that's why I didn't get to go, and everybody else did.
Go to Korea?
Yeah, that's why I didn't get to go to Korea.
What was your time that you spent in Nagasaki when you were there?
Oh, we used to drive around, go down and see this stuff, and I used to go in the hospitals and talk to the doctors and see these people and all, and geez, I don't know how long, Steve. I really don't know.
Let me ask the four of you a question. You fought on Iwo Jima against the Japanese, and three of you were in the occupation forces, and several of you visited Nagasaki. Was it necessary to drop the bomb to end the war?
I want to say yes in a hurry.
Yeah.
You damn right.
I think there have been at least 150,000 of us killed.
Oh, more than
Well,
that.
they figured 1 million casualties. If we
I had
property.
what I called a fellow that when I was in Isahaya, this kamikaze air base on Kyushu, he was a Japanese Royal Marine. They had to be 6'2" or above, and he was a big sucker. And he'd been the official beheader in Manchuria. And it finally turned out, I got talking to him, he had a mortar platoon which was going to be on the beach defending the same beach that my little outfit was going to land on. And that was when I woke up in a sweat one night dreaming about this guy, and I got up looking around since he told me about his official beheader, God, and I think those hillsides were so, terraces that they could just shoot down on you, much more than Suribachi.
Much more than anything they had in Europe.
And everywhere, I went into schools, and little kids over in the corner of kindergarten had these alley-oop clubs with these big spikes on them. All the kids in grammar school, everyone was ready to fight.
Oh, yeah.
And,
What do you think, the last guy?
Oh, no question. There was nothing that was so great when we heard, and we got up in the middle of the night when the atomic bomb was dropped, and everybody literally among our battalion was up to celebrate. And I know we had Coca-Colas and we had rum and Coca-Cola. And
you know what?
We looked forward actually to the occupation. When I was in Japan too, I did go down, and I don't recall what I saw in Nagasaki or Hiroshima, but the leveling of that, in spite of the fact that it was leveled with the exception of those few chimneys and one thing that are sturdy enough to withstand it. But I think without the atomic bomb, we never would have had that feeling of submission that we needed to eliminate.
We wouldn't be here today if it hadn't
Well,
been.
we wouldn't be here. I'll tell you something else too. If you look at the amount of ordinary demolition bombing that we were throwing at the Japanese and the Germans and so on, and saw how much we destroyed with demolition bombing, and how many people we killed, and how damaged they were who weren't killed, and they compare that to the bomb, it's really a lot worse than the bomb. It's a lot worse than the bomb. What difference does it make if they use demolition bombing to kill 1 million people over a period of 6 months, or if they kill the same number of people in 15 minutes with
All the incendiary bombs in Tokyo alone were bad.
Yes, and it was a terrible
That
thing.
wasn't a net bomb.
Well, that's one thing I'll have to say. One of the things that I was impressed by was the fact that the people would when they first saw us, would go, ooh, ooh, ooh. They were afraid of those bombs coming over every night and dropping, every night and dropping, every night and dropping. And so I was telling you about Mary Yamaguchi, who was from Glendale, and I talked to her about this, and she says, actually, this was so bad that I think if this war didn't end within 6 months of when it did, everybody would be crazy in these areas where you were dropping these bombs. People were just they were just
The demolition bombs.
yes, the demolition bombs. Yes, and then they said, gee, you could drive for miles and see all of these cities burned and destroyed, and every night the airplanes, every night. Am I right? This is these people who say we should have done. They don't know what they're talking about. That's about all I can say.
Before we close, anyone have any other memories of Iwo Jima they'd like to share?
Oh, except I'm glad I met these guys again.
It's great.
I'd like to say I appreciate being a part of this today.
Yes, it's a great idea.
Adoption, if I had a choice.
Crucial part of it is now pretty back, you know. And there's some of you remember coming right away, but both the horror, you kind of push it back in mind. It's another fun thing that happened.
I'll tell you one thing, I learned a lot. You people had different experiences.
And